Thank you for everyone for attending tonight. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. So as usual, we will begin tonight's meeting with a public comment. No one has signed in to date, but if there's anyone who would like to speak, please come forward, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes. If not, we can move on to the next section, but if anyone would like to come forward, please feel free to do so. Okay. All right. Randy, we were thinking about you, but there's a second public comment if you feel inclined.
Sure.
Okay. So we'll begin with board presentations. The first is the Village Traffic Study by VHB Consultants. And we can move forward with that presentation, but also just wanted to thank Trustee Parrish and Trustee Polaro for helping put this into place. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for the good work. And without further ado, feel free to come on down.
So, Mayor, Trustees, thank you for having me tonight. My name is Ryan Winter. I'm a professional engineer licensed in the state of New York, and work for VHB Engineering. We've been retained by the village to assess several different traffic conditions that they wanted us to look into because of various reasons. The first being the traffic on Hampton Road during peak hours, AM and PM, with through traffic coming through the village and the delay it's causing. So there were a couple things we looked at to mitigate this. One of the primary things we're looking at right now is to interconnect the signals, that is to make them talk to each other so that they go green and red in a sequence such that traffic will flow better through the Hampton Road corridor. There were 7 intersections that we looked at as part of this: Nugent and Windmill, Nugent and Hampton and Main, Hampton and Pine, Hampton and Little Plains, Hampton and Old Town, Hampton and David White's, and Hampton and Narrow Lane. As part of our study, we did not do a formal traffic study, but rather an assessment of the conditions out there and observations of the traffic conditions that were found during a typical peak hour and a Saturday during Labor Day weekend. Based on our observations, the traffic was backed up for the most part near the downtown area between Hampton Road and Little Plains and Hampton Road and Main Street. And as a result of that, we recommend that the village focus on mitigating traffic in those areas, namely through what we mentioned before with the interconnect, and that if future conditions required to maybe extend the interconnect down to Narrow Lane to the east. To do this, there's 3 different options that we're exploring. There's underground hardwiring. There is a overhead hardwiring that uses cable connected to utility poles. And there is radio interconnect, which is essentially wireless that goes from pole to pole, and the only cable is on the traffic signal poles themselves, so long as there is a line of sight. In terms of cost, the latter 2 are generally comparable. We understand that the village has a traffic signal maintenance contractor on board that may have pricing available for some of these, which we are currently researching to nail those down. But in our experience, based on the length of roadway that these 4 signals that were previously mentioned entail, the cost would be similar for each. It would just be a matter of preference for the village. The first option is considerably more money. Based on the length that we would need, it would cost upwards of $100,000 based on our estimates. So we would recommend one of the second 2 options. To nail down the timing for the signals, we need to do some further research and identify what the current signal timings are for each signal and how to adjust them appropriately so that they will go green in sequence and allow traffic to flow most effectively. In advance of this effort, we've worked with DPW and the signal contractor to modify signal timings as of today at Hampton Road and Pine and Hampton Road and Main Street, and increase the time on Hampton Road by 5 seconds. An additional mitigation measure would be for traffic signals that do not have loops on the side streets or turn lanes to consider implementing these, as when we implement the interconnect, it will allow more green time for the main line as necessary, and only trigger the side street when there's a car sitting and triggering the loop. So as I stated, VHB is going to continue to work with the village's traffic signal contractor. We're going to work to obtain the signal timings and hope to identify an ideal timing for to coordinate with each other, both in the AM and PM. And those timings would likely be different to accommodate eastbound traffic during one time and westbound traffic during the other. Kind of tied into this is another assignment that the second assignment we were tasked with was to look at the municipal parking lot at Cameron, between Cameron and Hampton Road, just west of Pine Street by the elementary school. It was identified that during certain times, the traffic and the ability to get in and out of the parking lot was hindered by existing traffic on Pine Street and the limited exit areas, usually, namely Cameron Street and Pine Street. Again, we didn't do a formal traffic study, but more of an assessment and observations of existing conditions. And we found that generally the parking lot and Pine Street function adequately, but there are times where Pine Street does back up beyond the parking lot and to the parking lot such that it is difficult to exit that site. However, we found during our study times, which were, get this right, Saturday, August 31st from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then on a typical school day was Tuesday, September 24th of this year from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and again from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. These times reflect the anticipated heaviest traffic flows for the school and the shopping center. So the highest volumes were seen on the Saturday of Labor Day weekend, as you could imagine. Even then, there was one 15-minute period where the traffic on Pine Street backed up beyond the parking lot. And at no time was it observed backing up to or beyond Cameron Street. After that 15-minute window, the traffic dissipated and there were queues still on Pine Street, but nothing that didn't clear within 1 or 2 cycles. The other time where there was a delay was during the PM on Tuesday, September 24th, when school got let out. For one 15-minute period from dismissal to 15 minutes after, there was a delay getting out of the lot there also and through the signal at Hampton and Pine. Other than that, there were no significant delays at Hampton and Pine or exiting the lot that were observed during the study period. Based on our counts, 80% of the traffic exiting the lot uses Pine Street, and the other 20% uses Cameron. The access driveways on Main Street and Hampton were used evenly for the most part. Very few cars enter the lot through Cameron Street, and the bulk of the cars enter and exit, as you would imagine, through Pine. Additionally, we looked at pedestrian activity in and around the site, and it was noted that the sidewalks in the parking lot were being used by people accessing Pine Street and the school, but there was also additional activity on the western end of the lot where there was less pedestrian facilities, and consideration could be given to additional facilities in that area of the lot. Consideration was also given to modifying or closing certain accesses in the lot to help accommodate the traffic flow. But based on the signal timing adjustments we're making at Hampton and Pine, we are taking the stance to see how traffic flows with those modifications before making any further changes. And we can revisit if needed or do a more detailed study. Finally, the last task was to assess the pedestrian crossings. There were two, Hill Street and near Halsey Neck Lane, and then also Hill Street near Sacred Hearts Basilica and the Shabbat. These two crossings were based on requests that were obtained by the village, and VHB was asked to assess the validity and necessity for crosswalks at these locations. So for Hill Street at Sacred Heart and the Shabbat, we studied two dates: Saturday, October 19th from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. when the Shabbat was active, and Sunday, October 13th from 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. The activity at the Shabbat crossing Hill Street was minimal. However, there was a lot of activity along Hill Street during that time. The Basilica pedestrian activity crossing Hill Street peaked for an hour between 8:45 and 9:45 with 11 people crossing the street and 27 study time, which again was 8:30 to 12:30 p.m. They weren't crossing in one spot. Obviously, there's no marked crosswalk, but in warning signage to warn motorists of the crossing. And then Hill Street in the vicinity of Halsey Neck Lane, that was studied on Saturday, October 19th from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. Pedestrian activity there peaked between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. There were 11 crossings during that time, and there were 20 total during the study period. The crossings mostly occurred at or east of Halsey Neck Lane. And again, being that Halsey Neck is generating pedestrians and bicyclists crossing to access the beach area from the neighborhoods to the north, we recommend providing a marked crosswalk with warning signage on the east side of Halsey Neck Lane to accommodate those folks. And that's basically a summary of where we are right now. Anyone has any questions?
Anyone in the public have any questions, or not any members of our board?
I like the crosswalk diagrams. I like those crosswalk ideas on Hill Street. Any other data from the parking lot, please?
Yeah, so we have a formal existing conditions report summary that we're still finalizing that we'll be providing to the village regarding the parking lot assessment.
Good evening, thank you. This isn't an easy task. The Halsey Neck crosswalk, you had indicated because you had noticed pedestrians heading to the beach area on that street. And that was just over that 2-day sample period?
That was a 1 day. That was a Saturday afternoon. that would study that particular area.
Okay. So in total for the study area, there were 2 study periods, one on Saturday, October 19th, one on Sunday, October 20th, and that was focused on the Basilica and the Chabad predominantly.
The morning, correct.
The morning, okay. But the second one, which was Saturday, October 20th, was focused on the Halsey Neck area.
Saturday, the 19th, in the afternoon, we focused on Halsey Neck, correct.
Halsey
From
Neck.
12 p.m. to 4
Okay.
p.m.
We've had previous public commentary, as we all know, indicating that there are large numbers of individuals, predominantly kids, on their bikes who stand for hours and cannot cross the street. So it sounds like you saw that evidenced.
Yes, and the Halsey Neck crossings were cyclists and pedestrians. Are the bike lanes there? However, for families, like you mentioned, or non-experienced bicyclists, they aren't necessarily comfortable turning in the travel lane, especially on such a busy road. So they'll act more like a pedestrian and try to cross from side to side, which is why we're recommending the crosswalk there.
And that crosswalk, would that mimic the crosswalk that we have in the village on Job's Lane, for instance, where, and I know Gary is our expert here, but striping, would there be a sign in the middle?
Yeah, so that sign is not shown on the plan.
On the plan, okay.
However, it could be implemented to reinforce the identification of the crosswalk to the travelers.
Bear with me, I don't want to be the only one asking questions. The distance between this crosswalk and then the other one is approximately, if you don't know it, don't worry about it, and I don't know why that matters, but I've just wondered if they were spaced far enough
I
so
believe
they
it's
would...
about 800 feet.
Okay. And it would capture the large, when you analyze this, you analyzed a strip, I mean, the entire Hill Street or just a specific area?
These 2 areas were the ones that were raised to us as areas where there was pedestrian activity,
Okay.
and there was a request for a crosswalk that we assessed. There may be other areas where crossings are warranted along Hill Street. These numbers are slightly below what you would typically grant a crosswalk for, but there's also engineering judgment involved that if there aren't any other crosswalks and it's a low-speed road and with high volumes, which Hill Street is, that it is appropriate with additional signage and such that we're showing on our plan.
May I ask some questions about your second page, and don't want to take up too much time, but I know we have a couple residents who live in that area present. The recommendation you seem to emphasize was the light sequencing.
Correct.
And that would be eastbound and westbound AM, PM. Would that be affected at all by pedestrians who press the crosswalk button, which is present on Pine Street?
Well, the timings would take into consideration the pedestrian crossing timings, so those would still be maintained, even with the interconnect and the changing of the timings.
And how much time do you think we would save? You had indicated there was already a several second save by syncing 2 lights. If you were to sync 4, what would that do?
The time I mentioned was the amount of time that was added to the signal to allow additional vehicles to pass through. It's not necessarily a savings time, per se. To identify that, we would need to do a further study to identify what the exact timings are of the signal, and then we could provide data on that, what the exact saving time would be for the modifications.
I misunderstood. Your point was the flow.
We added 5 seconds of green time
to allow.
Hampton Road at those 2 intersections to allow traffic to continue for an extended period.
Ryan, would that be about 3 cars, 5 seconds?
Yeah, yes, that's accurate.
Just repeat it so that it's on.
That would be about 3 cars per cycle.
Did you see any pedestrian activity accessed by students on that meridian in the parking lot?
Yes, there was significant pedestrian activity during the school day, and that that sidewalk area through the parking lot was heavily used. That's where the majority of people were walking. There were very few people that we observed walking outside of that.
So I'm backing up. The reason why this traffic study came up in that area is because, and I used to live in that area as of a month ago, so I'm very familiar with it, and I know we have Christine in the audience who lives in that area. Sorry, I'm giving away your proximity. I didn't say address. But we have a lot of backup of cars coming around and flooding Cameron, and Pine seems to be backed up, but you didn't see that as much, which...
We saw Pine backed up for isolated periods, two 15-minute periods during the entire time. But for the most part, things seemed to flow fairly smoothly.
The second issue, which it sounds like you're addressing, is the light sequencing to accommodate the flow, but the third was diagonal parking. There seems to be a tremendous amount of agita, for lack of a better word, on that diagonal parking, and I don't know if you have any views on that for Hampton Road, but...
We didn't specifically look at the diagonal parking on Hampton Road. Just in general, diagonal parking does slow down traffic and force people to, it's harder to see when you're coming out of the spot. So people kind of nudge their way, and then naturally cars that are trying to come through down Hampton are going to have to stop or slow down to allow them to continue. So just the nature of diagonal parking does tend to slow down traffic more than a typical parallel spot like is on the north side of Hampton.
It's the first time I've seen this presentation, but a lot of good work. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Trustee Parrish or Trustee Polaro, do you have any questions, comments?
I have no questions. I mean, a comment, I think the diagonal parking is really, would just be in the morning because it's going the one way.
Good point.
And stuff. It doesn't really affect you coming out of Pine Street going down from what was looked at. And really, it's where a lot of the backup was seen was for cars trying to make a left-hand turn on to Hampton Road, and Hampton Road was all the way backed up that cars couldn't get on there. So that's when they were sitting for a light or two sequence before that. So that's why looking further at the light at Hampton and Main, allowing more cars to cycle through that will allow more room then hopefully to flow from Pine. So that's one of the things that you were looking at and saying if we get additional lighting, and then also if we sequence the lights, it becomes easier as well.
Yeah, to just build on Andrew's comment, the traffic signal at Hampton and Main seems to be in the westbound direction, the pinch point where a lot of the traffic kind of dissipates once you get past that point. And it's a combination of having the busy businesses on either side at that time of day, and the timing for Hampton is a little less than it would be at the other intersections because Main Street is a busy street by itself, so it allocates a little more time than some of the other intersections. That being said, during the weekday that we observed in the PM, the traffic on Hampton was not backed up to the point where it was impacting the traffic exiting Pine Street too much. It was more on the Saturday where it was heavy traffic for the businesses during the midday that was really causing the hardship for cars to get out onto Hampton.
I have one. So Ryan, when we talked about Hill Street, about crosswalks.
Yep.
What was the distance between crosswalks generally is done? Do you remember what that distance was?
There's a minimum, unless you're in a downtown area, you don't want them within 200 feet of each other. Okay, but otherwise they can be spaced as required and if necessary.
So when we looked at Hill Street, I remember having the conversation with Gary, Andrew, and myself, and we talked about once we come from the blinking light and we get down to the first crosswalk is at the intersection of No. It is at Job's Lane and Pond Lane. That's the first one. But we've always had problems with traffic. That's been a big thing. We've actually, unfortunately, had a loss of life there years ago. And it's been brought to our attention that people were having struggle in crossing, and we felt that could a crosswalk be put somewhere. And so we chose these spots. You looked at it and said, look, these are 2 spots that we can look at. And surprisingly enough, I didn't think that there would be that much on Halsey, and that was Columbus Day weekend, I think it was, that weekend. I'm pretty sure. And I was surprised the amount of people on bicycles that weekend wanting to go down to the beaches. So I imagine in the summertime, it's probably a lot more. It will also slow down traffic to a certain point, which is what people really would like to see. And then we have a crosswalk, I believe, 800 feet, which utilizes the 2 houses of worship right there. And interesting enough, people can park down by in front of the South and then come up the crosswalk, go that way, and from First Neck, if we do this. I think we even talked about extending sidewalks, Gary. We've brought that up too. So this was really looked at with a lot of detail. And I think there's a very, very good situation, especially on Hill Street, that this could be really beneficial to our pedestrians as well as traffic. Getting back to the parking lot off of Hampton, I live in that parking lot, so I do understand the chaos that it can have, and you're being pretty good about your study. I see it on a daily basis. It does go. We don't take into the fact when people first turn into the parking lot, how that loop gets affected. You're studying traffic going back on Pine, where you said it doesn't go to Cameron. Well, it goes all the way back this way, and then people shoot out the other way. So moving, when we discussed syncing of lights, you went all the way back to, did we go to Little Plains, or did we go beyond that to the next one, Leland?
We went to Little Plains. We looked at potentially going to Old Town and Leland, but the traffic flow that we saw did not warrant it at this time.
And we would go Little, Pine and Hampton, Maine, and then all the way to Windmill, correct?
Correct.
And those would be the 4 that would be synced.
Yes.
Because once we get to Hill and Windmill, that seems to be fine. Correct?
Yes.
So he did a very good study. It was well thought out. When he presented us with this, it really was something that, doing it radio waves, I think were the best way to start that. I think it would be a big help.
And I'll just mention moving forward also that the syncing of the signals does not have to be along one corridor. If necessary, the village could consider going up North Sea Road with those as well to kind of sync traffic.
Get a lot of traffic. That was an interesting point too. People are bypassing the intersection of County Road 39, shooting up Hampton, and then making a right on Hampton and Main Street to try and bypass.
And just back to the crosswalk for a second, the one by Pond, by the movie theater that you were referring to, the location where we were proposing these other 2, the visibility will be much better for the pedestrians and the drivers because there's not that diagonal parking that sticks the cars out so far. And we will, there's already clear area on the approach to both crosswalks where we're proposing them. There's no parking there currently, so there won't be any loss of parking, and it'll just provide additional visibility for both the peds and the cars.
People like the no loss of parking.
All right, well, thank you very much. I think Gary has a few comments to add. The only thing I would add is to complement what Trustee Parrish said, which is wireless syncing for me would be preferred. I don't think anyone would like to see additional wires above of our streets, so that would be ideal if feasible.
Just a couple quick things, Ryan is here. As far as the Halsey Neck crossing, that would just be a paint job and signage, very easy to do. We have warm days, we could even do it, going into the winter here. When we get over to Sacred Hearts, that will involve concrete. If you look at Sacred Hearts on the northern side, you see a jog in the drawing, and it's due to the elevation on the north side of the street. So what Ryan had to do is he had to ramp up there in order to be able to connect it to the sidewalk. So essentially, we just have to work our way down to get to that. Of course, that project, that will take a little bit longer, and depending on winter, we might do that in the spring. All right. Also, of course, we should talk to Father Alex and I'm sorry, Father Mike, excuse me, and just make sure that they're okay with this coming right into the front of there.
Thank you. Actually, that was one of the first things I was thinking is because they're redoing their front walkway and everything. So yeah, I think that would be good to let them know that we're thinking of doing something in front of their church.
And then the last thing was just back to the traffic study. The cheap thing we can do is change the timing. So after they did this study, we looked at that today. We kind of said, let's change it for 5 seconds. Ryan and Leslie Johnson today also said in another month we can look at it. We can change it another 5 seconds. And we might see that we're getting enough cars through there that we don't have to do a lot of other things. So before we spend a few $100,000, maybe we have a quick fix here. Let's look at it, see how it works. If anybody who sees it, we can get some comment and see how it goes.
Testing waters.
Thank you, Gary. So our next discussion item will be Tony Piazza, who is here to discuss bioswale benefits. Tony, thank you for your time. If you could keep it on the briefer side, that would be helpful, though I know there's plenty of benefits you'd like to talk
That'll
about.
be up to you guys. Tony Piazza, 27 Henry Street. Yeah. Did you guys get a copy of this in your package?
No, we did not.
Okay.
And thank you for coming on very short notice.
Sure.
Thank you.
You can pass it.
So there's some renewed discussion in doing some work at the southern terminus of Lake Agawam to mitigate water runoff, which would also help with some contaminants that find their way into our water, our local watershed. And this is a plan that was done a while ago by, I think the town trustees sponsored this. And there are some grant applications coming due in about a week. So this was sort of quickly brought to the forefront and examined to see if it is sort of a worthy plan to follow. And I think it is. So I thought I would
Thank you, Charlie.
talk to you guys about it tonight. So
Could have done that.
you can see that this is the wider part of Gin Lane that is in between Lake Agawam and the Bathing Corporation and the Dune Church to the west. And if you remember, there's a large concrete strip that separates the two parking areas. And the idea here is to remove that strip of concrete, change the parking slightly, and do some engineering of the grade and the soil in that strip, and then plant it with plant material that can handle extreme drought and extreme wet, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but there are plants that can handle that. So, the basic definition of a bioswale is any planting, any earthwork and planting that slows the movement of water through a watershed. So they can be done passively by just doing something that we would call an engineered wetland, or they can be done non-passively, which is in how this system is set up, where there is, it's a combination of some hardscaping and plant material to accomplish the same goal. So I'm not a huge fan of the hardscaping part of it. I actually like to do more passive bioswales, but I think that this plan is certainly worthy of looking at for grant purposes, and it could be tweaked depending on how the public would want to move forward with it, if they do, in the future. One comment I have about it is that I think there should be more than one cross-access through this planting. Right now, especially people going to church, they would have to, if they parked on the far east or far west of this, they'd have to walk toward the center to get across. I might poke through this planting twice just so that people have easier ways to get through it. And then it also has a bioswale treatment, this is not the weir, on the actual land in between the end of Lake Agawam and the asphalt there. So that was planted a while ago, and from what I understand, when Hurricane Sandy hit, so much salt water and sand got into that planting and the plants weren't suitable for it, that a lot of them died off. So it was a valiant effort. Nobody expected the ocean to wash over or that much salt spray to get there. And again, if this plan was to be followed, that plant material could be selected to handle those situations in the future. So that's my spiel. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Tony.
I presented, by the way, I presented this a week ago, not presented it, but explained it to the town trustees as well.
And how did they receive it?
I think they received it well. They asked me a lot of questions. The reason why I talk about these things is because I was involved with the one in East Hampton. And they asked me a lot of questions about the public-private partnership that was put together to complete that project. I think that's why they wanted to hear from me. Ann Welker was sort of interested in that.
The one thing, I think it's great. I mean, I like wonderful help reduce the water into the lake and all of that. The question I have is where you are putting the swale is currently a walkway so that people don't have to walk in the parking lot on either side.
Right.
And walk behind cars that are diagonally parked that may or may not see you.
Okay.
So if there would be a way to make sure that there's still some sort of way to park, some way to walk, I think that might be very helpful. Maybe it's before the diagonal and before the ditch down.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, because otherwise you're going to have people, and a lot of the people attending church, because I go to that church every week in the summers or whenever I'm here, they're older. And so to have them walk behind parked cars and stuff, that might be dangerous.
Right.
I do agree, maybe a second cut somewhere. But if you have a walking area for them, then maybe the cuts aren't so bad through it.
Yeah, Trustee Polaro, I agree with you. This is not my plan.
Okay.
This is not my design, and that's one of the flaws that I see with it. Probably one of the best examples of this is at the Parish Art Museum.
Yeah.
If you've been there, you park in the back. There's a walkway. There's a bioswale there in between their meadow and the parking lot, and they have a sidewalk that goes across it. So that's why I said it needs some tweaking, and I think that this was sort of front-burnered to try to take advantage of this grant money that's available.
It may have been front-burnered, but I also see that the date on this is August 2008. So
Yes.
it's kind of been back-burnered for a while.
Right.
I'm happy that you're front-burnering it.
It's interesting
That's
because it's a
even a word, but-
really sound plan. If you look back that long ago, somebody was thinking about water quality issues.
Yeah.
So, good thing.
Now, what were the trustees, what were their specific issues? You kind of like...
The thing that they asked me to talk about a lot was public-private partnership. That was the most, they wanted to know how we did it, how we pulled it off in East Hampton, and they were concerned with costs. They actually asked me to put a number on this, which I was really put on the spot and felt uncomfortable doing, so please don't ask me that tonight, because there's a lot of hardscape and engineering to go into this. And it could be done many different ways. The concept is spot on.
Okay.
The execution.
Is how it goes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, with regard to the village, you're letting us know what is happening, but really the permission and all of it is through the town trustees have to give that because of the property line?
Yes.
Or because of the cuts and the crosswalks, that's something we need to work with you, or no? This is really all with regard to the town and their permitting for this?
I think that...
And you're just letting us know, which we very much appreciate.
If I can, let me just maybe set a little bit of the stage. Tony's here tonight because because of the profession he's in, and he's a very, very strong advocate of bioswales. He didn't design this, nor is he going to be the person who will ultimately do the design. So I think that's what's making it difficult for you to kind of pin down
Yes.
what would be happening here.
I'm here because I understand these things, and I'm local, and I thought I could help you guys, answer any questions that you might have. It's it's flawed. And there are a lot of agencies involved. We
Yeah.
have ownership. I think one side is owned by the town trustees, the other side is owned by the village. We have Lake Agawam Conservancy that's interested in this area as well. And that's what I stress to the town trustees, is that this should be a cooperation between all three of those entities and maybe a couple more. If that's how we did it in East Hampton. So it's just too big a project for one.
Yeah, well, I was just trying, I mean, my question really was more about the process of what is town, what is village, and all of that. And if it is more just keeping us appraised because the majority of this is in town, or if there is something that we have to work with. So, again, I think I love the idea.
I think that minimally from the village, they would want your support.
Yeah.
And I know that the grant application process asks for letters of support from at least one municipality. So I'm sure the town trustees would be willing to, but the more support you have, the better. So,
Right.
and I have no idea where that application process is. All I know is that there is a group talking about applying for some grant money. I'm working on that same grant in the village of East Hampton for phase 2 of what we did there. And I know that they're looking for matching dollars from non-municipalities. So Surf Rider Foundation is stepping in with that one in the LVIS. So that's the public-private part of it.
And the first phase in East Hampton has gone very well enough for them to go on to phase 2.
Yes, that phase was really, it's happily it's functioning. The bacteria levels are decreased tremendously in the water that comes through there. And the best part is it's hard to get water samples because it's doing such a good job. There often isn't standing water there anymore. Only water in huge rainstorms like we had the other day. But I lost my train of thought. What was your question?
Just how East Hampton was.
The biggest success with that bioswale was what it did for public awareness of water quality issues, because a lot of people thought that it was just a pretty flower painting. But when there was an education component to one of the grants that we got from a private donor, and when the people started understanding why that was done and what it did and how it helped water quality, specifically Hook Pond in that instance, there was sort of this groundswell of support for water quality issues throughout that village. This village needs one of those. It will bring a lot of support to the good work that you're all trying to do in the future.
Tony, we had a bioswale before. It just wasn't as good as what's being thought about today, right? We had some type of bioswale, I was told, or is that?
At the end of Lake Agawam? Mm-hmm. It was I would call it a native planting. There's no way for the water to get into that bioswale, and that's part of it, because I'm pretty sure it's curbed. So for a bioswale to work, the water's got to be able to get in there and pass through the system.
But it sits in our village, and as Trustee Polero pointed out, it's important, and whatever we can do to help you, let us know.
Yeah, there's also the Clean Water Committee. So many committees, I'm losing track. But so, like I said, a lot of very interested people wanting to do things like this in the village, and I just think within the next couple of years you'll see some traction.
I also think, to Rich's point earlier about speaking with Father Mike and doing the crosswalk outside, I think we would want to speak to Father Patrick about, just to get his thoughts on, and this is not directed at you, this is kind of in totality, get his thoughts on the Dune Church.
I agree.
Just to make sure that his parishioners will be safe, as well as probably talking to Don King, the manager at the Bathing Corporation, just, to allow them to weigh in slightly. So not directly for you, but for whoever will be.
And I'll pass that along.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think you said it the best with East Hampton. It's raising awareness.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have a chance to do that.
Right.
That's a good thing.
And it's a bonus. It's a bonus that it raised the public awareness that it's functioning is.
And it works.
Yeah, that's really great.
Thank you, Tony. The beauty of this also is that we'll be working with and in collaboration with the town trustees. Just to take everyone back as to kind of the genesis of the project, we were actually approached by Fred Havermeyer actually had emailed us about this, and then we brought in Bill Pell from the town trustees, and the trustees obviously have some control over some of this land. And what Bill Pell said is that they also have a budget that they can allocate towards this. So there's some funding right there. I believe it's approximately $20,000 of funding that they get to spend on projects like this. So we can tap into that, and it will also be hopefully a public-private partnership where we can get a private organization to help us fund a portion of this as well. So we have, the village, the town, private entities involved. So thank you very much for stepping up, presenting, and then of course, obviously, we'd love to give you a letter of support for the December 6th Suffolk County grant application.
Bill, you're right. Bill Pell is the person that spearheaded the front burnering of this, and I'll call Bill later and tell him that. And that's it.
And the only thing I would add is that's another just good sign that our board is working very well with the town trustee board. The other day when I had a conversation with Ed Warner, he said he was very pleased with the relationship that he has with the village right now, and said it's always a good relationship, but he believes it's never been better as far as working in collaboration with the town trustees. So it's it's a good time to be working closely with them and collaborating. So thank you again, Tony, for everything you've done on this project.
Right. My pleasure. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes, for the record. Thank you.
One thing I'd like to do, if it's okay with the board, we have discussion items, but I noticed we have a number of people here that would like to speak on behalf of the public hearings. So, Russell, I believe we might have to make a motion just to move the public hearings above, just to change the agenda. So, if that's okay, I'd like to make a motion to move the public hearings prior to discussion items.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So with that said, we'll move forward with public hearings, and the first public hearing is the local law repealing regulations surfing. So I'd like to make a motion to open that local law hearing.
All in favor? So, just very quickly, the village started the first public hearing on this local law back in September. We've had some very spirited and very positive conversations. Essentially, this local law, as drafted, would eliminate a section of the village code that currently does not permit surfing in the village from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. from June 15th to September 15th. Again, there's been a lot of discussion both at public hearings and outside of it. I was asked to just give a quick summary of the SURF Committee's opinion as a group. I see some members here that may want to bring some of their individual feelings into it. What I first want to say is I've seen a lot of committees, and a lot of times they takes a long time to get them rolling or moving or thinking where they want to go, and this committee was probably a group of people who were very, very dedicated and very into this entire process, and the participation was phenomenal. The SURF Committee discussed two major things, but obviously this public hearing is just about the proposed local law. And so essentially, after quite a bit of discussion, the committee was told that they could make one of the three following recommendations to the board. One would be close the public hearing and adopt the proposed legislation as is, adjourn the public hearing until a future time, or close the public hearing and take no action at this particular time. What they came out with after, again, pretty spirited discussion, but again, I think everyone was in agreement, that surfing should be permitted at Village Ocean beaches with the exception of the 3 county-permitted bathing beaches, which are Cooper's Beach, Southampton Bathing Corp., and Southampton Bath and Tennis. For those 3 beaches, surfing should be prohibited from May 15 to September 15th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. That is their recommendation. In discussing with council, and she can weigh in as well, we would believe that those changes, if this board were to take that recommendation, would be considered substantive changes. So anytime that you have a public hearing and you're making any type of a substantive change, you need to repost and notice the public hearing. However, I also know that there's been some discussion as well that after getting some of the comments from the audience tonight, as well as the board, that it would be recommended that we reach out to folks who are residents that are primarily avid swimmers, beachgoers that, aren't necessarily, surfing, but that is where the surf committee came out on this just specific issue of this local law regarding completely taking the language out that prohibited surfing.
I'm not sure if, Counselor, you'd like to weigh in any further, but if not, we can open this up to some comments, if anyone has any comment on this matter.
I think you can open up to comments
Okay.
at this point.
Jane, I'm not sure if you're here to observe or just make...
Yeah, we're just observe for
Okay.
now. I think Russell handled it fine.
All right. So we would just...
I just want to add one thing. You had surf schools, you had individual surfers. And again, the dialogue was strong. It was back and forth. But boy, the one thing that is certain is that the love for surfing in this community is very strong, and it puts aside all kind of other differences that they may have on certain things. And I must compliment them, every individual on that committee.
Can I just ask one thing, Russ? Then what is, just to refresh the public and me, a lot was just said there, what is the difference between their proposal, which is door number 3, and the existing, what we have on the books? What are the
Okay, so what you have on the books...
similarities and what are the differences?
Okay, so what you have on the books is that surfing is prohibited from, pretty much the entire village, Fowler's all the way west, from June 15th to September 15th, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Now, unless is it, okay, it's fine, 9 a.m.? Yes, 9 a.m. And the village, in the code, it does say that the village board can, by resolution, permit surfing. They agreed with what I think a majority of this board felt when this was first introduced, that it's kind of backwards. It should be the other way around, that we encourage surfing, and that surfing should be, the law should say where surfing is prohibited from what time to what time, as opposed to prohibiting it all across the board. So that's the current law prohibits it, with the exception of a resolution of this village board. They're recommending to kind of flip it over and do it the other way. Our local law as written essentially just wipes that section out and essentially would permit surfing at any time, inclusive of June 15th through September 15th.
And the proposal here is to exclude the widely used, as you said, the county recognized beaches.
Yeah.
I know we had representatives from our law enforcement there. Did they have any opinions from them that you observed, what their thoughts of that third, the committee's recommendation?
I think the law enforcement was primarily had to do more with the understanding that there is at those public bathing beaches lifeguards and enforcement present that monitor those beaches, Law enforcement was very active when we talk about it sometime. I think we need to wait until, have a discussion on it when we got to the surf schools and the permitting of surf schools and how to enforce, surfing and not surfing. And they had some really great ideas with regards to how to better serve the public and the needs of people who are looking for surfing and so forth. But with regards to this, and I guess the chief could weigh in, their recommendation is a very clear law that is very easy to understand, and there's not that much not as much ambiguity with regards to if they are called upon to come down.
So did law enforcement think this option, this recommendation, was less ambiguous?
I
don't know, would you think?
Yes.
Would you mind? I don't want to put you on the spot, Chief.
On behalf of
Would you
the
mind
chief, he is
opining?
nodding his head up and
Okay.
down.
I don't want to throw you into it, but since you're here,
As he's
you want-
walking up, I will say their surfing expert, Lieutenant Wetter,
Yes.
was the most active of law enforcement
Yes,
at the meeting. But
I made 2 of the 3 meetings, so kept my mouth shut for the most part.
So what was your take on
You could do what the surf committee wants you to do by resolution now, or you could repeal the law and do it with a new law later. It's your choice. But I think the 3 beaches, and you can always revisit, but that was the consensus, that those 3 beaches seem to be where you shouldn't surf, and every place else you should surf, if you want to.
while you're standing there, there is something that was brought up that obviously, because of health, safety, risk, any other types of reasons, that the mayor and the board and certainly law enforcement can put out an edict that it's unsafe to surf, or we're going to prohibit surfing because of A, B, C, or D. And so there was some discussion regarding that when there are health and safety issues that
the board could always step in and take
without
over
a doubt.
and do something?
Yes.
Okay.
How is there a delineation, I'm assuming at the bathing corporation where there are the ropes into the water, that's where surfing is prohibited. Is there any part outside of that where surfing is prohibited? How about at Cooper's where there are no ropes, and then also at the Bath and Tennis there are no ropes? How do you stop, or how will the surfers know where they can and can't? And when the sandbar, as it was when I was growing up, was in front of the Bath and Tennis, you would still see a lot of people in there, or, starting at Little Plains and going down, or, vice versa. So how do we make sure, and maybe not for you, Chief, but I just want to make sure that, because I know surfing is policed by themselves a lot. And so I just want to make sure, how do they get the word out? And again, not necessarily for you, but just for the public to make sure. So
Within the committee, the discussion was that the lifeguards should have the authority to tell the surfers where they can and cannot surf at the beaches.
And it would be
At the
fine.
beaches that we spoke about, the 3 beaches.
And they kind of do that currently.
Yes.
When that happens. So it's right. I remember, so it's already in place.
But if you're not a member of the Southampton Bathing Corp or the Bath and Tennis Club, well, it doesn't really matter because they don't have a rope, to your point. Even if there are surfboards to the right and left, the Bathing Corporation lifeguards would direct those surfers not to be in that area?
That was the consensus of the committee.
Okay.
Got that right? Yeah.
Thank you, Chief.
thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Chief.
So, Russell, what was the consensus of the committee? Was it repealing this law or amending it to just, what was their feeling on it? Because that's one thing we keep talking about. Do we repeal it, or do we amend it to do what exactly is making this resolution or adopting it?
Essentially, you could do it 2 ways. And again, Alexandra was present at, I think, at least 1 or 2 of the meetings. Second meeting. You could do it in 2 steps, which is, a lot of more expensive and a lot of paperwork for me. Don't worry about me, but it's more expensive. You could repeal the law and then hold a public hearing to do the recommendations they're making, or you could, in one local law, repeal and put in place the parameters that you want to put in. So essentially, it's whether you want to do it in 2 parts, change your code book technically twice, or if you think you're going to do the whole, the whole package, then you would have a public hearing on a local law that does what this law does, repeals. And so everything, a majority of the folks said that they were going to do, repeal this local law, you're still doing that in the same time setting some parameters. So it could be the best of both worlds, depending on how you feel, you want to get to where you want to get to.
Yeah, essentially, you'd be repealing it and replacing it with what the
Simultaneously.
simultaneously,
So the idea tonight...
consecutively, but in the same meeting.
So from tonight, the idea then would be to close this public hearing, taking no action, and then we have to go out again and to a public hearing with everything that we want. Is that
I just
my
want,
understanding?
right.
Or
I think there's a couple things in between that were recommended by some folks that I think are, again, the board should consider. You can close it, you can leave it open for public comment for, a period of time, because people may want to watch this, they may want to send some things in. So I would set a date certain that written comment could continue, including written comment from the SURF committee, and it would be on the record of this public hearing. And you would then, you can close it. But before you maybe go out to advertise, and the reason I don't think we would put something together tonight is because I think that there are members of the community who still feel as though there is because this committee was called the SURF committee, it was made up of surfers. And that, can we get dialogue out, can we get information out to people who, may want to give some feedback with regards to this proposal, I'll call it, it's not a proposed local law yet, from some different vantage points. That's really the only thing.
Ultimately, this is a board decision, so I don't know if you can start with you, Trustee Pilar. We can you can state what you'd like to do, and then we can build a consensus. So I don't know if you have a position here, but really it's up to the board.
it is up to the board, and I mean, I think that we're getting good input from the SURF committee. And so, I'm happy to work off of their thoughts. Again, as we come into budget season and expenses and all of that we're all looking at, I think it would make sense to try and do this in one fell swoop, and get the language right for what we want to and how we want to put it forward as stated. So whether we want to leave it open till then, or whether we want to close it and reopen, I have no problem either way. I'm happy to keep it open for written comment through a period and then go from there.
So you prefer to keep it open but adjourn it?
Could I step up?
Yes. Maybe let's. Why don't you come on down? I was going to run through.
After? That's fine.
Yeah, let's run through the board and then we can do public comment. So is that, just to be clear, you'd like to keep it open and adjourn it?
I have no opinion whatsoever. I mean, if the consensus is to keep, I think we should keep it open because there are going to be people that are seeing this tape in a couple of days or when it gets up, and may want to comment on it. So I think we want to receive their comments. So I'm happy to keep it open for written comment to come in, and then and hear what other public has. Whether or not we close it tonight, as Russell said, with a written period for comments to come in, I'm fine. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Thank you. Just, again, just want to gather thoughts here. Trustee Parrish, what would you like to do?
Do the written comment, like Russell said. I got no problem with that. I got some way to go. Close it tonight. Russell, is that what it is? Closing it?
But, yes, you could close it tonight, leave it open for written
written
comment,
comment.
and then, certainly Alexandra can work with the comments she's hearing tonight and, and whatever else comes in, and if this board wants to have a, public hearing, keep in mind that it's not common for us to do this, but since this discussion has gone on so long, you are permitted to hold a public hearing for the first time, close it, and vote on it in the same night. So it's not necessarily going to slow you down even if we were to notice another local law that has all in place. So
Trustee Pilar, so you're probably in line to close it, then not to keep it open?
Would close it, but keep it open for written comment.
Okay.
So that's,
Thank you.
yep.
Trustee Allen.
Oh, gosh, I'm always the outlier. I wouldn't want to close it just for written. I still don't understand the process of how the trustees close off another beach if and so it's necessary. It may just be a simple answer. I haven't studied it, and I also don't understand how the surf schools are going to operate. But I think it's very much heading in a very, very good direction. I simply just want to have a few people listen to this tape and ask us a few questions, and so that we have a very good answer to those. So,
if I can just add, Trustee Allen,
Yep.
the proposed local law that is on right now does not address and has nothing to do with the surf schools. That's an entire different section of our village code.
Yeah, so it's,
And so that will be the next commentary. There's some commentary already here, but that'll be the next commentary, and in all likelihood, they're going to recommend a local law change to the area of our code that talks about surf schools.
thank you, because I was actually kind of mentioned something like that, because it is actually, that is a separate issue. Well, what's at hand here is about repealing the law, which is, as stated, that there's three options. One is the current law, which restricts it between that time frame. Or repeal, second option, which takes it all out. But I like what the committee's done, and I thank you guys. I did hear some good feedback. Actually, I didn't get any insight into what you discovered, and I actually wanted to be surprised. And I am pleasantly surprised. I was told I would be. So you guys did work very well, from what I understand, in conjunction with the law enforcement. I think your proposal is a perfect compromise, quite honestly. So I have no problem proceeding with how to enact what the committee, because that's what you guys were put together. So whatever is the most expeditious and clean and cost-effective way, Russ, meaning if it's to close, written, close, and then submit, announce, I don't know, a lot was said, I really don't know which one's the better way, but I think the committee put forth a good recommendation that I think is a good compromise, and still leaves the flexibility, as the board always had, to exercise jurisdiction and if and when necessary. And of course, then the other ideas of the schools and so forth will be addressed at another time. So I like the idea. I just want, tell me what's the best way to go about that, or tell the board.
I don't necessarily, that there's an absolute best way. What I am saying is that if you were to adopt the local law tonight, or at some point, and then think about entertaining, or you believe that you're going to modify it in some way to, and as they're proposing, I'll say, prohibit it at the bathing beaches, then probably the most efficient way to do that would be in one local law.
So, but we close out the repeal.
I'm also very sensitive to the fact that a majority of this board did say we want to repeal the local law, and you'd still be doing that, but you'd be doing it with a second solution. But again, it's the board's call. You can get there both ways.
Yeah. Well, I'm in favor of whatever way the board. Yeah. I like the proposals, really, is what I'm trying to say. And if that's, I would put that into law. That's
So really, it sounds like we want to close this. We all know I had a certain stance on this, and I don't want to go against the board. So really, I just want to leave it up to everybody here. Because I was the
Yeah.
outlier last time, so that's really up.
No. Well, I think that's what these guys came up with, a perfect compromise. So I think with what people had come to you and what you presented and what the board comments were, so I think this, as Russell said, this is it's refreshing that a committee's put together and actually came forth with a very actionable and quick suggestion.
I mean, Russell, the only thing I wouldn't want to do is I wouldn't want to repeal this entirely. I would like to leave this resolution piece in there because that's critical for what we want to do anyway. If we close it and don't repeal this resolution, then I think it might be harder to navigate. But again, I don't know if we could change the syntax here just so that we don't repeal those resolution, because the resolution is also the important component.
You mean the resolution that essentially
That we reserve the right to
reserve
designate.
the right. So if you take no action, that resolution still is the order of this board. This board has placed an order that there is no restriction. So essentially, it is the belief of council and in my experience as well, that if somehow this gets mired down, it would take a resolution of this board to take that resolution away.
So again, if it sounds like we want to close it, that's fine. Again, I would like to modify this prior to close so that we don't repeal section 2, subsection 2.
Yeah.
If we're closing tonight with no action, then this stays as is. So the resolution there's no lineage through it. This is the law. My understanding is if we close tonight with no action, the law stays as it is.
Law stays as it is until you take some
it away,
action. Right.
until we put in the proposals by the SURF committee into written form, and then we reopen and go back so that we have a public hearing to remove the subsection, which we could then leave in written resolution,
Yep.
as well as then putting in the proposals that the SURF committee has stated, that there are surfing everywhere in the village except the 3 designated beaches. That is done. So that's my understanding of how things would work tonight.
But the public comment on the proposals in written form, the future proposals, when would that take place?
The future proposal would be a presentation to this board, a notice and a public hearing, which would be open for both verbal and written comment on, and again, I picture this new local law repealing, section N1, rewording section N2, which talks about the ability of this board to take an action, and it would add a caveat of where it would be prohibited from May 15 or June, I forget if it's June 15 or May 15 to September 15.
With an allowance of public comment on that new proposal.
The new proposal would absolutely have the opportunity for public comment. So folks who are interested in this have, and I would recommend if written comment would go until December 11th, which would be the day before our next board meeting. So you'd leave it open, so there would almost be a constant flow of comment. Keep it open for written comment through December 11th. Decision could be made on the 12th. I would think that we might be able to put together something that would announce a public hearing. You'd have that public hearing at your next board meeting, and you could adopt at that board meeting with the modifications to the local law.
But today's November 20.
Yep.
Thank you. And we would have to notice on,
So essentially, you'd publish and post a notice on the 12th. You'd hold your public hearing first meeting of January, and you probably would adopt in the first meeting in January. That would be the time frame, and to me, it would give an ample amount of time for comment, so you wouldn't have a situation where you would hold the public hearing, have your vote, and people would say, hey, I didn't get a chance. This is kind of
So it gives
probably
the
giving
time.
the widest berth of public comment you could give.
And then ultimately getting to that
Yes.
meeting in January and kind of letting people know that the intention will be to repeal and replace
Yes.
at
At
that
that
time.
meeting.
At that meeting,
Okay.
okay.
Good. I like that.
I was trying not to say repeal and replace, but we did it, so thanks, Rich. Okay, so let's open to some comment here. I think Shane or Franny wanted to
Yeah.
say something.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Go ahead.
As he's walking up, wait till you see what they propose for the surf schools in Kennedy. Am I right? This stuff is great.
Hi, good evening, Shane Dykeman, 220 Town Line Road, Sagaponic. Thank you for having us at this meeting tonight. Just to make clear on this resolution that we're essentially getting to the same place either way. The resolution you guys put in fixed the problem. But I think the fear of the surf committee and the surfing population as a whole is how and when or if you guys can just pull that resolution, if that's possible, and then the law stands. That's why we want to go through the lengthy and costly process, so this can't just, we have some issues, and then you guys say, resolution gone. Don't know if that's possible or how that works. So that's where I think, speaking for everybody, they want a solid, concrete thing that can't be repealed. And then as far as the surf school, which is of my interest, I don't know at what point.
We'll put together a public hearing, and then you can make comment both as a member of the committee. You know, the only thing I ask anyone who stands up, are you speaking as part of the committee, or are you speaking on your own personal
Right,
volition?
right.
But that would be a separate public hearing. Who knows? I don't know how ambitious the surf committee is. That could be ready for some.
Yeah, like you said, we were
about the
doing
same
good
time.
work, and we all came up with ideas. You know, I as the permit holder for the past multiple years, you know, I kind of just put guidelines on what I have always done and what I think that we could move forward with to try to accommodate all the issues. Okay? All right, thanks
Thank
very
you,
much.
Shane.
And then I'm going to leave this with Russell, so you guys can review at your own discretion, and then thanks again.
Thank you very much.
you.
And this is exactly what we would like to do as a village, where we can obviously involve our community, have a committee form, let the committee without board, without a board involvement, have you guys come up with a solution, and then you could advise us. I think that's exactly the way to do it. So I know there was some intense discussions, but thank you very much for volunteering your time. Thank you, Franny, for getting involved to do this. And we're hoping, knock on wood, this leads to the ideal outcome and a good compromise from everybody.
What I will say is that what Shane has handed out is work product, and it's perfectly fine, work product of the committee, and I would say that a huge part, if not every part, of what is in here sounds like it's going to get melded into the comments that were made by other known surf instructors, I'll call them.
Fran, did you have a comment? And you, as you know, you've been to more meetings than probably everyone on this board combined, but there's a 3-minute limit, so.
I mean, I can't talk over my 3 minutes. Francis Adam Chesky, 40 West Prospect Street, Southampton. We did a lot of work. Safety aspect and everything about surfing and the 3 beaches that we wanted to propose that were closed, taught everybody surfing. I'm sure there's going to be people that want to comment about their safety about swimming with surfing at the other beaches. But as a surfer, I see a lot of swimmers come up and come out to where the surfers are because they feel safe. And I'm being a surfer, I actually helped out a few swimmers that get in distress when they get caught in the riptide, and you help them out and you help them to the beach. So we did a lot of work. It's been good. It's been really good. The surf schools and the lessons, it's coming. So you'll find out. But we're doing a lot of work, and I hope everybody's happy and satisfied. I mean, hope the proposal and the resolution goes through. I mean, I think Russell's got everything written down about the the 3 beaches and the change if need be for health and safety wise, as for the law enforcement to take control and to have them be in control. So.
This is really good. Thank you. The rash guard by designation, phenomenal. That was a great idea. I don't know who came up with that.
We're all working
It's all,
together.
I'm telling you, it's coming together. There are people calling from all over the world. Am I right?
Yes,
You are correct,
We have people calling from
yes.
literally all over the world because, obviously they're out surfing everywhere. And what I'll say is that oddly enough, the committee was set up in a fashion that all 3 surf schools, known surf schools in the village, are participants, but they only count as 1 vote. So they have to find a consensus among themselves, and they're leading it. It's really very, very positive, I'll say. And there is a lot of consideration and discussion about bathers, talks about parking, how do we pull, we know that we pull up sometimes with 3-4 surfboards, and the discussion is taking into account, all aspects of our beach goers. So that's,
All aspects.
yeah.
Thank you very much. And, I just want to ask this, I hate to do it, but I want to ask it simply because I want the public to be aware so that no one has any concerns. Perhaps this is a question for our counselor, but if we were to modify this chapter either today or months down the road, would that interfere with anything else going on with different parts of this chapter?
No.
No? Okay. Just want to make that clear because I know there was public comment saying it would, but want to just clarify that it would not.
Right. Yeah, I think, I also did hear some discussions with regards to, Dune Beach and public access and
I don't
those
think
types
we
of
need
things.
to get into that.
I think that the discussion on that is probably going to center a lot more around the commercial activity, which would be the surf schools and those types of things. Less about this particular law and more about the commercial aspect of it. If I'm
Yeah, I don't think we really need to comment any further on.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanna- Okay, thank you.
For this first phase.
I got to get your signature.
Well said.
Thank you.
Counselor, for this first phase, when do we think we will have legislation written for this part and recommendations so that the public can view it?
A proposed draft of what the committee is proposing. I think ideally we would have a proposed draft early next week,
That early?
midweek, mid to late week.
Okay.
The only thing that might slow it down just a little is the method in which we get some input from, I'll say, the bathing community. Other than that,
And that is still important too, as you pointed out, that's still out there, forthcoming, I would imagine.
All right, so with that said, to make sure we're all on the same page here, we want to close, we'll make a motion to do that, and just want to make sure we're good. Okay, so with that said, I'd like to make a motion to close the hearing on this,
open for public
and
comment
leave it open for public comment
until December 11th.
until December 11th. Thank you.
Right.
Written comment.
Written public comment until December 11th.
So motion to close, leaving open for written public comment until December 11th.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. Okay, thank you. Good work to everybody here. Government takes some time, but when we build consensus, it definitely works well. So next up on the agenda is public hearing number 2, local law regarding vacant buildings and storefronts. So Russ, I don't know if you want to take this, but basically this is I'll just quickly jump in. This is a hearing we've had open for a few months now regarding a law regarding aesthetic upkeep and vacant buildings. I think at this point we're all familiar with what this law says. So I think it's best to just open with some public comment. I see a few people that might be here. So if anyone would like to come forward with public comment, they should do so. And obviously keep it hopefully to about 3 minutes. And then after that, Russell, you might want to go into some recommendations as to what we can do. Council the same. So
You're making a motion to open the.
so we'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you for that. If anyone would like to come forward with public comment, we've got an open mic.
Hi, I'm Jane Clare, and I live 123 Cooper's Farm. And I just wanted to say that the village looks beautiful, thanks to the beautification committee and you all. And I'm just worried about Job's Lane. So I took some pictures because I'm a very visual person.
You could probably move the bioswale. Sorry, Tony.
Tony, do you want this back, or we're leaving this here?
No, he's coming around, I think. No.
Tony. Okay, so I just took some pictures, and you don't really know if they're empty because there's no store there, or if they're for rent. And, oops.
Thank you.
I think this one's returning. And I thought this was the best one, so I saved it for last. So I would just like to see that we address this issue, because it's really rather sad when visitors come into our village and they come to Job's Lane and there's only a few stores really functioning year-round. So that's what I wanted to present and say, let's do something about it. Not sure what the creative solution is, but love to see something done.
Thank you very much for the comment, for the photos. Do you want to take those, or should we put them in the record?
No, I'm going to put them in
Okay.
the record, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Those mannequins will look great in our public record.
Thank you.
Probably worse stuff in there anyway.
50 years from now, someone will pull us out.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Sure, come on up.
Sure.
I'm Karina Hildebrand. I just opened a store on Jobs Lane.
Please face the board.
Hi,
Yeah, there you go.
sorry, I
All
just
right.
opened a store on Jobs Lane on the 3rd of October.
Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you. And everyone has been incredibly welcoming, so it's been a really wonderful experience. And just today I put in an offer to keep the store year-round. So I'm hoping. Really, I just wanted to say that obviously I want to help in any way, and I'm very interested in all the things that can be done to try and regenerate. I think Jobs Lane is incredibly beautiful, and it's kind of surprising that the situation is as it is. I didn't plan to open a store. I only sort of started the whole process about 3 weeks before I moved in. Once I got settled, I decided, or lots of people said, I needed a sign. So my only comment, or one of the things that I think you might like to consider, is that in the short term, you are going to need to encourage pop-up stores, because the only way to get people to move in full time is to let them probably try it out, as I have done, and it's been successful. Once I had settled in and I realized then I needed a sign, or I wanted to have, a more obvious way of letting people know that I was there, because so many stores are empty and very few people were expecting to see a new store. I spent quite a few days with one of the sign companies, preparing everything that was needed, and I then sort of very gradually heard about all the different obstacles to getting a sign approved. I was told that there was a meeting, this is a few weeks ago, on a Monday where it could be presented in some way. So I got the paperwork together. I thought, great, I'll take it in on the Friday, I'll submit my paperwork. And I came in on the Friday, and the person upstairs looked at me as if I was crazy, and he said, well, the agenda's already been typed up, and there's nothing that can be done. and, I should have submitted my paperwork a week before the meeting. I didn't know until the day before that there was a meeting and that they were every 2 weeks. So I said, well, okay, when is the next meeting? And he said, well, because of Veterans Day, it's in 3 weeks, which then meant that I was in a position, if I submitted, to maybe getting a sign 3 weeks before my pop-up was going to be complete. So I just wonder whether there might be a simplification process, because I have a very, basic sign that I'm putting up. I have a nice logo. I completely understand you might want to put something in place if somebody wants to stick a shark up on a roof or something like that. But, if it's just their company name, I would have thought, I was kind of expecting to submit the artwork and get an answer a few days later and say, yeah, that seems okay.
Couple
That's
things.
just my comment.
First, I'll just start by saying, and this is good dialogue, this particular public hearing we're having is about vacant storefronts. It's not necessarily about signs. I do believe that there has been some conversation with our building inspector, who also feels, as I think many of the board members do, that when things are standard and straightforward, that the village needs to find a more expedient process. So, unfortunately, when there are certain things that need to go in front of certain boards, there are rules around publishing, posting, and noticing, so that if a neighbor or someone wants to come in and comment about what you propose, they're given enough notice that you're coming in front of that regulatory board to discuss it. And that's really the reason it gives the public an opportunity. However, I do believe, and someone can, whoever is kind of familiar with it, that the village is looking at this, correct?
That's right. We've discussed it with the building department, thanks to comments, from yourself and from other merchants. And Russell, you're correct. While this is a public hearing on a local law on vacant buildings, what we can do is, it is a best practice as well, by Nikon, my favorite book here, but basically we can actually make a motion to actually add a discussion item tonight if we'd like to quickly have a very brief discussion about how to handle this. I would love to do that. I know that we're looking like we're having a long meeting here, but would love to quickly add a fourth discussion item later on, and that would be a best practice as well. So we can thank you for the reminder there. We can talk about that later tonight.
And just another comment, obviously, because of the photos that you took. I mean, I do think that stores that are are renting a place for a whole year, but deciding to close my intention is probably to close in February and March, but I intend to be open for 10 months of the year. I will leave my mannequins dressed. I will leave my product in the store, and there will be some signs saying, when I'll reopen. So one way to at least make it look more attractive and less deserted is to insist on those companies to, keep their windows or keep their products in there if it's going to be their company's store ongoing. And maybe, artwork for artists filling windows. I met a few artists recently who were talking about they would love to have an opportunity to dress some of these empty windows.
Thank you. Just to get your opinion now. Sorry.
It is a store, by the way.
My store?
Yeah.
I'm a knitwear designer, and I'm at 38 Jobs Lane. I've taken the beautiful store that is at the entrance of the courtyard that I love so much, that I hope will survive whatever is happening in the background. I'm opposite. Yeah, I'm sure you know. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? If not, I'd like to just bring this to discussion to our board. Again, we can go from our left to right. So So Trustee Polaro, I just want to get your thoughts on how we should proceed here, and then also if you would like to keep this open, what, if anything, would you like to have changed in the law? What ideas do you like? What do you not like that's in here? We want to open up to hear your thoughts.
I think there's a lot of good coming out of what is written. I know that we were looking at East Hampton as kind of a basis on what we were doing. I think that there are still a lot of questions that many of us have with regards to it. So, I don't know that we can, at least I wouldn't be comfortable voting on it tonight, because I do think that there is more discussion to do and to have Counselor kind of have a look at it. But I like the direction that we are moving in. Very much so.
Great, that's great news. Is there anything specifically you'd like to add or change from this?
I don't think there's anything to add or change. I think it just is again, kind of making sure. I had asked Counselor to look and see of the vacant storefronts that we know who are or aren't in compliance with what the laws that we would propose are. And I want to make sure that, from the pictures today, it looked like, we have some that with mannequins in the window would be not in compliance with the law as it's written today. I think there are one or two other shops on Main Street that would not be in compliance with the law as written today. I know that, when you and I spoke the other day, there's one that we think looks good and one that, we would like to work with. So I think there are just, some ongoing things that we need to hash out before we could say, right, happy with everything in there. Because I would hate to pass something that then we need to relook at in 6 months, 12 months' time.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate comments. And again, I just want to make sure that we're all, on the same page here, which is why I think this format, works pretty well to kind of go around open discussion, which also is something about what we're going to discuss later today as well. But I think what this also comes down to is to what extent, if at all, should the village, state that landlords or merchants must follow certain procedures. So, for example, when we have those naked, mannequins in the window that don't really seem very attractive or very much Southampton-like, if you will, is that something that the village can say, you can't do that? So I guess that is the big question that we have here today, and that will help us moving forward with the law, and ultimately we have to decide on something that we're willing to vote on. So I guess, Trustee Parrish, I'll turn it over to you. To what extent should the village say, you can't do that?
Well, I'm going to answer this question that you first asked. How do I feel about this right tonight?
Right.
We're getting very close. I reached out to Alexandra over the weekend and sent her an email with a bunch of different questions. She responded to me on Monday, answered a lot of those, but in the email, when I asked you, do you think it's time to adopt this week, you said no, it would be premature. So I want to follow the counselor's advice, which I think is the best practice right now, and continue to talk about this, because the answers from the photos we saw tonight, that's something that I don't think we even talked about yet, about what happens if mannequins there that's not dressed. So I think that these are the questions that we like, and because Jane came in, thank you, and brought those up, it just adds that one more element that say, look, let's go back and let's start looking at this draft again with the booklet that I went through with East Hampton, and then really get this done. And I could see this really going on, possibly, maybe at the next meeting, being able to come up with something where we can be like, okay, let's do this.
Good. And again, unfortunately, just so everyone knows, as a board here, we don't have the opportunity to kind of sit in executive session or behind closed doors to discuss it. So this is really the only opportunity, we have to discuss this is right here in front of you today. So the only question I'll ask is would you be comfortable, just providing some direction as to that mannequin question, in the law, should that be prohibited, undressed mannequins in
Do I want a
window?
naked mannequin? No.
Okay, so just make sure we're on the same page. Just, that should be, essentially in the law. And I don't want to. I want to wait till we get other opinions, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. But I would just encourage, as we continue to go through, every member of this board to really look through this, look through the law that East Hampton has, and kind of come to the next board meeting with kind of what you're ready to do and what maybe you're not ready to do, just so that we can all be on the same page here. And again, just so everyone, it is so hard to get everyone together because of the open meeting laws. So again, this is our format, but again, there's a discussion item later on tonight that will hopefully allow us to maybe meet a bit more and in a different format. So we'll get to that later. But Trustee Allen, curious on your thoughts.
Sure. Trustee Parrish, what were some of the items that you identified that we should be raising our antennas on?
Vacant versus unoccupied, which I think that Jane had brought, like, there were some decals on or some logos still on. Are they here or are they gone? So those are one of the things. Tim Marin brought it up. And that's one thing that needs to be addressed. Do we treat them differently or do we treat them the same? I think, Alexander, your comment to me was we treat them the same as if they were unoccupied. Even though they weren't here, they shut down for X amount of months, they still have to be
30 days.
Yeah, yeah, so that was one of them. The notice, when we do pass this law, how long would we give them notice for to get out to everybody so everybody understood this is what's going to happen, this is the effective date. How long would that be? That was another question I asked. So there was a couple other ones in there. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I mean.
One of your questions was about whether or not we should give a verbal or a written warning to a property owner first before issuing a citation. And it's my understanding that oftentimes the building department will try to approach a landlord or the tenant to say, you might not be in compliance here. Is there something you might be able to, can you do X, Y, or Z to bring yourself into compliance? So if that's something you feel that you need or want written into the law, that's something to discuss. I don't know if it's necessary or not. It might be worth talking to Chris about, what his thoughts are on that. And then you had asked about what the fines were, and for the minimum is $750 for a violation, and it's not to exceed $3,000.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Allen.
My question is actually back to everybody here. We have almost 300 storefronts, and I wondered how many of the landlords and retail owners and managers we've spoken to and have asked them, if we were to ask you to do this versus place legislation, what would you do? So that's my first question. I know in my Business Revitalization Committee, we're going to have this discussion, but people anecdotally have told me they want this to happen, but my sample size is 6, and I don't think that's a good sample size. So I don't know how it is for the rest of you.
Where do you, just out of curiosity, where do you stand on volunteer versus legislate?
Well, obviously, you legislate because it's not moving. And if we ask people nicely and they don't move, we legislate. But I also know from a math standpoint, conspicuous vacancies affect the dollars of the open retailers. And we want to make those conspicuous vacancies as attractive as we can. We don't want to have an eyesore in the village. So my stance is, let's make it as aesthetically pleasing as we can. But my only question is, we are a community. People don't try and do the wrong thing. Let's ask them first. Would you do it? That's all.
Thank you. Well said.
Thank you.
Trustee Ostremski, I know you're our aesthetic specialist here.
That would be me. Now, I mean, quite honestly, I defer a lot to store owners and landowners in the village and the business district, of which Trustee Parrish is one. So, not to repeat, but I agree with what all three have just said, and combined basically what Trustee Allen just said and what Trustee Parrish said was, do I like having something in place? I do think something needs to be in place, as Kimberly said. a lot of laws that we have, a lot of codes, what we already have in place, they are primarily, even in police, with a traffic violation, a lot of times it is a verbal. You do usually give a person an opportunity to comply or tell them to, would you do this or not? So what I've only seen with is I like the simplicity of East Hampton. There has to be something put in place. The one question that was brought up that Kimberly and Mark just brought up was about the enforcement of it. Where do we go with enforcement? So I didn't know there were that many storefronts, so thank you for that stat, which you're very good at always coming up with. I don't know. But that's a lot of storefronts, and as nice as I want to say, yeah, let's all do this, there will be some that won't. So something has to be put in place. It's ultimately the two discussions with Mark and Kimberly just said it really. What I like is ask them to comply. When they don't, something's got to be able to say.
All right, thank you. So the only additional comments I would like to make is that ultimately, we're public servants here, and that means, at least to me, we obviously serve the public. We listen to what our residents and our businesses have to say, and so ultimately, when I speak to our business owners and our residents who want to be walking around Main Street and Job's Lane and enjoying what we have, for me, their message is very clear. We have a beautiful village. We have a beautiful village thanks to the beautification committee we have here, thanks to Gary, head of DPW, thanks to our highway and parks department. Our village looks great right now. The only thing, in my opinion, that could be better is making sure that our streets, really are elevated. And it's unfortunate that we're approaching Thanksgiving and we've got all these vacancies, and vacancies are inevitable. That's a different discussion, but what is more unfortunate is that you look down Job's Lane and you can tell where the trend is heading, and it's going to get worse, not better, just aesthetically. And so I would love next Thanksgiving, the look and feel of Job's Lane in particular is different, and potentially what we do have to look forward to is that Easter, when a lot of the weather gets a little warmer, when we have some spring visitors, when our year-round residents come out to visit us, that they can come back to Job's Lane and see an improved-looking village. We've also had great responses from local art organizations such as the Southampton Art Association, Southampton Art Center, who have stepped up and who have volunteered free artwork to anyone who has a vacant storefront, and they will put it in their window free of charge. And we have other local artists as well who, again, have stepped up. And so this shows that we have a very strong community. We just have some holes, no pun intended, in some of our streets. And so I think it's super important to address that. And then furthermore, unfortunately, we've had this law discussed for a very long time now. And we have a lot of people who've also stepped up and have volunteered to participate. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that there are others who are not volunteering to participate. And that, unfortunately, requires us, in my opinion, when actions of one party affect the actions of another party, that's the time for government, especially the local government on the most micro of levels, when we have only 3,500 registered voters, when we have our pulse to the ground, we've got two members of this board who have businesses in the village, and then obviously everyone else who's always there. It really is an opportunity for us to do something here. So I would just say that our homework, and we really need to work hard on this, is to spend the next 16 days prior to our next meeting to make sure that we can get together, even if that means one meeting at a time between board members, integrate good laws that other villages have, and integrate this so that we're in a position to show up at our next meeting and pass something. Again, Trustee Parrish and Trustee Allen, you make great points about noticing that out. We don't want to surprise anybody. We want to give people ample time, so this is not going to happen now. But again, the goal should be by Easter, we have a different looking village based upon this law. We also have a great logo that we brought up in prior meetings that Julie helped design. That looks great. That says Southampton Village with a tree that says Eat Shop Local. That could be an option for some merchants. So I think that this is conceptually this is good. We do have some work to do here on the law itself, but I think we're moving in the right direction. But I think now it's time just to get to the finish line here, and I'm excited about, this law. It's pretty simple. It's not so heavy-handed. And on top of it, there's precedent. There's other villages around Suffolk County and the rest of the country that have similar legislation. So we're not even, doing something so different from what other villages have. So those are my comments here. So I think obviously the best thing to do here is to adjourn this to the next meeting, and unless anyone else has a different strategy.
May I offer an operational observation?
Sure.
If I could. If we go to the second to the last page and look at section, to me, I think when you take a look at this law and all its pages, it looks a little burdensome. And to me, there's just 3 areas that the board needs to focus on that I think are a little have a little ambiguity to them, and possibly in talking with East Hampton Village, who we have a great relationship with, where they've run into some issues and are looking to possibly tighten it up. And one is in 108A9, the word other promotional objects. I think, again, what do we mean by that? 108B, the village building department is available for suggestions and a resource assistance. I think, again, that could be tightened up, and I think one of the things that East Hampton has, and we all have a copy of, is we should take a look at what they hand out as recommended storefronts. So I think, we could add in there that the village offers a guidebook, or whatever you want to call it. And then 108D, again, what does it mean, when considered as a whole, predominantly appeals to commercial interest advertisement and, prurient interests? I think that's where, when you have property owners who just don't want to pay attention, and as we see here, most of our merchants are merchants that want to participate, but doesn't matter what you do, some don't. And if we don't have a little clearer understanding here, I think we're going to have a lot of situations where people are going to go, well, under whose opinion does it mean that it's predominantly appealing to? And those are the words I think we just need to tighten up. And then I think this thing, everybody seems in favor of it.
Good point, because I was at an art exhibition and it was all mannequins. Believe it or not. Without arms, without legs.
That's an exhibition.
I know, but
Anyways.
it was art.
But it was there for a period of time.
Right.
So, it's a show versus a empty store.
So let's take this home, let's mock it up, and let's hopefully get in position to pass something, even if it's pulled back a little bit. That sounds good. So if there's any other public comment regarding this hearing, anyone can come forward. Not. Motion to adjourn this. Russell, when's the date of the next meeting? December 12th, right? So I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the next meeting.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I know you came in and said that you're open for a quicker meeting. It looked quick, but sorry about that. Okay.
Oops.
So we can try to move quickly through this. We'll move to discussion items. The first discussion item is December public session. I'm sorry, and so Russell, I'll let you take this from here.
Okay. Does anyone want to come to work on Christmas Eve?
Santa does. Santa's going to work that night.
It's our duty, yes.
Yeah.
We should have a meeting here in December.
Okay.
It'll actually be the second job I work on Christmas Eve if I come. So,
Yes, I know. So those who are already working don't need the extra burden. So traditionally, the second meeting in December, if it falls, on or at, just around the Christmas holiday, it is postponed.
Canceled it, yes,
So if we could have discussion about it, or we could entertain a motion that the board.
I'll make a motion that
So
we
moved.
cancel.
Yes.
They have been
All
done
in
for every
favor?
year since I
Okay.
Okay. The next discussion item we're all very excited about. Gary, thanks for hanging so late tonight. ChargePoint electric vehicle charging stations.
You start your day at 5:30, Gary, right?
Not quite.
This is late.
Saw Gary at 9 a.m., talking about more bioswales, actually.
Yeah. Okay, bear with me a little bit here.
And Gary, if you could do us a small favor and keep it on the briefer side, that would be helpful, but we obviously want to hear everything, so.
Okay, so a few weeks back, we had a grant meeting. Kim was there, Jesse was there, our grant writer was there. We went over a bunch of different grants. One subject that kept coming up was EV charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations. At the time, the grants we were looking at, we really didn't find a fit that worked. We said we would explore, look a little further. We did talk to the town. Kim gave me some suggestions, and we eventually found that there is it was originally called a rebate, but there is an 80% grant that comes through NYSERDA. So what we're looking at tonight is we're looking at identifying 3 locations in the village. To place charging stations. What I did is I went around the village, I looked where we had existing electrical that would cover these. So the 3 locations you're looking at, one is the railroad station, one is near the men's restroom in Agawam Park, and one is at West Main Street behind 25 Jobs Lane, behind the SAC. And these locations were picked because the services have availability of 80 amps, which is what the station needs. The CT 4000 station basically has 2 charging systems, so we would place it in between 2 parking stalls. If I could just revert back. It would look something similar to that. So essentially, we would buy the unit here on Long Island. We would buy all the electrical supply. We would install this ourselves. And then we would have the company give us a program to maintain it, especially the app and other things that are required for it. The total cost of 3 stations would be total cost of $34,884. The village would have to lay that money out, and then there would be an 80% grant. So the actual cost to the village after the grant would be $4,271.50. This idea has been around for quite a while, and with this rebate, I think it's time we bite on it and go for it. If tonight, if you're all in agreement to it, you would pass a resolution. That would give Jen Messiano and I the authority to go out for the grant. The grant would probably take about 2 months to get, and then once we got that grant, we could order these and begin installing them. A little more on it is there's basically, many different companies. I looked at ChargePoint because it's the biggest in the world, it's biggest in North America, large share in New York. They also have a New York State bid, so we don't have to go out to bid when it comes time to buy them, right?
Great.
All right. The town had one called EV Connect. I really could not find too much information on it, so that's why I decided to just stay with one of the industry leaders. We could also add a village logo or anything else we want to the charging sign.
That's great.
This is called the Level 2 charger. Essentially, in about 1 hour, it'll add about 20 miles of distance. So you would pull up, you would have a ChargePoint app in your phone, you would tap your phone to the screen, it would begin, it would tell you to, plug your car in, and then your car would be monitored while it's on. You could be having dinner in a restaurant, and you could see how your car is doing. If the station is full, you could see when the next one would be available. You can put your name in to reserve the space to be the next person to charge on that space. So there's a lot to do with the app side of it. We originally were looking at just getting 1 unit, and then Jesse, Kim, we kind of all said, let's get 3 and get going on it. So they basically said, put these units in, do not add any more, see what your usage is, and as your usage grows, grow with it. So, any questions?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Make a motion.
2-hour parking limit there. You get 40 miles.
Well, that is the other thing about this. Every spot we put one, you're losing regular parking. So Usually, a lot of these places, they'll have like a 4-hour limit parking on it, so it will change. That's really about it.
How many spaces around the village could we today add stations to that have power existing close by?
But these are really the 3 main ones. Other than that, we're going to have to enlarge electric services to buildings to do it. You know, obviously the Chamber of Commerce. You have here. You have, what do we have? We have the other restroom on Job's Lane. You have firehouses. So we could pull power off of these things, but these are the 3 easy ones. All right. The other thing one more thing we'd have to do is we'd have to set a rate. They generally say to start out with $1 an hour, and that's pretty much a break-even rate. It doesn't give you your money back for the expense of installing, but it covers electric and maintenance on the unit.
What's our maintenance, do you think, for the year?
On these? I have it here on the... It's basically $1,045 for a 5-year plan.
So we'll be charging for this?
We will get charged from that.
Or are we passing anything on to?
No, we're trying to break even is what we're doing. So we're going to go out and we're going to buy the units, and for that $4,000, the village will just eat that cost.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Right.
But I'm talking about the electric use.
So the electric use, what I would like to do, we can set it any way we want. I would like to set that rate at $1 or $1.50, whatever would cover the electric usage, so it doesn't cost the village anything for that car to charge. So we won't really be making money, but people will be coming out to those stations just because we have them. Okay.
That was a great pun.
Huh?
That was a great pun.
Where's the
Congratulations.
total
Are we
charge?
charging for this?
Are we charging?
Total cost.
No, because the pizza area,
Right.
and Tesla doesn't charge, so if we're charging to charge, then.
And with the logo, shop and dine locally. Get out of your car and,
It's still probably less than gas, obviously, to charge that amount, I would imagine.
Will we have to decide about charging now, or that's after the fact? Would that be
No, we can set that rate at any time. Right now, we're asking to go out for the grant only.
Yeah, no problem.
So let's make pass a resolution here, and then we can discuss the other stuff at a later date. So
can I make the motion?
go for it, please.
Because usually it's the guys jumping in, sorry, guys. I'd like to make a motion.
Or the person that presides over the meeting.
True. No, not always. I'd like to make a motion that we go forward with the grant application for our charging stations that Gary and Jen so well identified. Thank you.
Second.
Second, yes.
Seconded too?
Okay, and on discussion, it would be my recommendation, since this is a relatively low amount of money, and we are anticipating getting the lion's share of it back, that we don't establish a capital project, that we use trustee special projects to pay for this, and that, then the reimbursement would go back into the general fund and could be used again for trustee special projects.
It's only $8,000, right?
Right, but you do have to establish and put a purchase order in and encumber the total amount.
Gary, I just wanted to let you know that somebody else sent to me tonight that Newsday said a new electric school bus pilot program was launched last week in Bayshore, Long Island. So all electric buses. I wonder who they're using, just curious.
I don't know.
You still have to vote, just remember.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I didn't want to
My
forget.
mistake.
I've done that. No, we're still in discussion.
We're still in discussion. Well, also, but, Trustee
Charging
Allen.
ahead.
Charging it.
Trustee Allen also asked at some stage about, electric trucks. So we have that to look forward to with.
I did
once
send a
Tesla-
sample to the board.
Once Tesla figures out their windows,
Yeah,
we can certainly look at all of that.
Gotta take care of
Trustee
that
Allen,
indestructible
for,
window issue.
Yeah.
But outside of that, yeah, I think Kenny would look good driving it.
Okay, all in favor?
Okay.
Thank you. To all I don't see, happy Thanksgiving.
Right. Good night. Thank you, Gary. Great job.
Thank you, Gary.
Anything to bring foot traffic into the village.
Okay. Discussion item number 3, landscaper registration regulations.
In your packet, you see a memorandum that was prepared by the clerk's office to put on notice our landscapers that our landscaper registration legislation takes effect January 1st, 2020. We have put together a mailing list, so we are prepared and ready to, if the board approves this, this memorandum out with an application, as well as just a sample of what the sticker would look like. I do know that we've gotten a number of comments from the public and from landscapers regarding several parts of the landscaping law. Primarily, a lot of it had to center around our current regulation. As I remind everyone, there's no change in the regulation of the fact that you need a Suffolk County home improvement license to do business in the village. That still has become probably one of the biggest comments we've heard. So really this is to, prior to sending this letter out to the list of landscapers that we have and starting to publicize and move forward, just to have a discussion as to whether or not we were ready for this. I know some people said that 3 members of this board were not on the board when this law was passed, so there's an opportunity for some discussion on it and then move forward.
Would anyone like to provide any discussion?
Well, I do think Russell is right that the majority of this board was not present when this was discussed, and I think Rich and I had a very good discussion about this, and our view is so the issue is, if we ask our landscapers if we enforce this law that takes place on January 2nd, our landscaping community would be required to evidence that they have either a Suffolk County Department of Labor licensing and Consumer Affairs license. And the feedback that we had received last year was the landscaping community and the Nassau Suffolk County Landscapers Association are very much in favor of us requiring this village-only permit, but they felt that there was some burden with regard to the Suffolk County license. Why? Because it resides. To go get it, you have to go to Hauppauge. There's a test, and it's more expensive than having one in the county. And Russell, you and I spoke about this, and I know you're researching it. So I think it's fair for this board to have some time to vet those different elements. I will say that the town of Southampton will be adding a test, or they have indicated that to us. So now they're at parity on the test component, but the dollar amount and the distance amount is less burdensome with the town. So that's just the general backdrop. Do you agree? And all the discussions we had
You covered it very well
last year. But I think Rich and I, both Trustee Yashtemsky and I, both feel that we need a little more time for everyone to understand and have conversations with our community around this, and would recommend potentially deferring this for a few months.
correct. Yeah, because, again, to let the new board members weigh in on it, and the most contentious part of it was, again, whether to subscribe to the county licensing or the town. So instead of burdening our local landscapers with hitting this January 1st, which was the original plan, I think we're all in agreement, or would like to recommend that registration deadline gets pushed back a few months to March or whatever, and it gives a little reprieve to the landscapers. They don't have to do anything as of January 1, and we can figure where we want to go with that.
And Russell, we also need to research with the town, because this would, shifting over to the town from the county would require an intermunicipal agreement, and we would need to vet that, and we have not had that opportunity.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion items?
I will follow Trustee Allen, Trustee Shrimpsky's leading. I thank you for speaking to one of the gentlemen that had contacted me, because I didn't know much about this law at all. I appreciate you covering, and I guess it was a very good discussion from what I got the feedback of, so I'm in agreement with both of you on this particular item right here.
Thank you. And thank you.
I have no problem pushing this out a little bit more, buys a little time. There's a couple other things, though, I would like to discuss. Number one, I know that some residents of ours are working, especially Tony, who was here earlier, on a training for the landscaping community on how to landscape organically, or how to landscape with limiting the use of chemicals, herbicides, and pesticides. So I think it would be advantageous when we have to do the licensing agreements that we give them some information regarding when and where these training classes are, these educational classes are, and number two, how much they will cost. I think the goal for these residents putting it together is to obviously keep the price as low as possible. Ideally, they'd like to do it for free. They might want to do some nominal fee just so there's some engagement, even if it's they want to make them as affordable as possible. So I think that'd be a great idea to include that in. So when you go and you apply for your license or you pick this up, you can then take these educational classes on this up-and-coming, trending industry of organic landscaping or chemical-free landscaping. The other thing I wanted to put out there is in a conversation with Kevin McDonald of the Nature Conservancy, and this is could be a bit much, but he had suggested some type of process where we actually have a little bit more documentation as to which properties are having chemical, pesticide, and herbicide applications. Because when we look at our freshwater bodies and our saltwater bodies, such as Shinnecock Bay, and runoff, which we're doing a good job on drainage, we had this conversation about bioswales earlier, we don't know where these chemicals are coming from. And it is, New York State law, you have to have some type of, red flag on your property, but we don't know how much pesticides and chemicals are being used. It could be a little, it could be a lot. So Kevin had this idea of actually asking the landscaping community to let us know which homes there's application. We could obviously find it by the red flags, but also how much. So I just wanted to float that idea. Again, it could be heavy-handed. By the other hand, it is not saying you can't use them, which you can't even do in New York State. It is essentially just documenting where these dangerous chemicals are on which lawns and how much. Because if we know how much, we then know how much is running off into our lakes and freshwater bodies. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that, but I just wanted to float that out there.
I don't have a problem with that, because it's been discussion in the past about, wanting to eliminate it. It's tough, and people have to make a living, all that. But again, you have a lot of these waterfront homes that's been mentioned a lot of times, that have these beautiful green lawns, and that only happens a couple of ways. So I think that's a less invasive way, and probably a way we can legally do it, if we can legally do that. I don't know if we can yet, but I don't have a problem with trying that out.
All right. Anyone else?
The landscapers have to submit to the DEC where they're using chemicals and what they're using and where they're applying it. So
And it's a different license.
The knowledge is
already there. Okay.
And all of that. How we get it is one thing, and I wouldn't want to force the landscapers to go against maybe what's in their contracts and stuff of privacy laws and everything for now asking them to report on their clients. Just something to think about. Because the information is there, we can get it. There was one other point I was going to make. Also, we have to be careful, too, with the yellow flags that are put out on the lawns. Because I know since the meeting earlier, I have tried to talk to my landscapers, go as organic as, chemical-free as all of that. Yet they still put out the yellow flags because if somebody sees them spraying something and there aren't a yellow flag, and whether it's organic or not organic, someone could say, well, they were spraying and there's no yellow flag, so what am I at risk of? So a lot of landscape companies put out yellow flags to cover their...
CYA, right. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
So just, I mean, just three points to be made with that, but I think, and I know that I spoke about it with one of the committee members, again, to create a map of where we're getting pesticides to and from. It's a great thing. It is a great thing.
And that was a great point. You already pointed out they have to do it anyway with the DEC.
So how do we get that information, whether it's on the landscapers or whether it's somewhere else, getting it from the DEC, rather than putting one more thing on landscapers?
No, good point. No, good point.
So
I can find out if the DEC will give that to us, but I think that might be separate. So we'll
yeah, but I like the idea of creating, you're basically creating a map and a database of where, and then we can see how water flows from different, excuse me, how water flows, and if if these pesticides are getting captured and where they end up.
And ultimately, if we were to go ask our state assembly person or our state senator, please help us, ban chemicals and things like that, they don't have any data. So it's hard to ask somebody to do something when there's no data. So the goal here would essentially ask for some data, and maybe we could even be one of the first villages to do something like that and set the tone for other communities. Again, just an idea I wanted to throw out there that Kevin had suggested. But equally as important is the training and education. So, Russell, if we can work on something, you can even ask, Tony, for example, can you provide when these classes will be taking place, what the price is, what the syllabus is, and where you can attend, because we'd like to encourage everyone to attend those meetings.
And also, resources of, Cornell Cooperative Extension and all those other resources that are available as well. I think it's very important that we get that information out. Absolutely.
I don't want to take this too far, but you could even offer, as a public-private partnership, you could say that if they would attend these classes, again, it's a revenue issue, but we might waive a registration fee or something like that if you'd be willing to attend these educational classes on chemical-free lawns. Just something to float there. So, okay, that's all I have on this. I don't know if has anyone else any.
Well, it says right
thoughts?
here in the home improvement license, if you use any regulated chemicals or pesticides, you must submit proof of New York State DEC certificate. And I'm curious what they offer as educational requirements at all, but I have heard from many people, again, it's anecdotal, that people just take the buckets of fertilizer and pesticides and just pour it out. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we're trying to avoid.
So we don't know because
We
there's no data.
don't know. And with respect to the yellow flags, any person has the right to approach any person who is applying something onto their lawn to ask what that is. If it looks like it's a pesticide or fertilizer, that's already a law statewide.
Apparently from the Dr. Gobler presentations, Old Town Pond, the nitrogen and phosphate loading there has more to do with herbicides and pesticides than Lake Agawam. Lake Agawam has nitrogen loading more from wastewater. But Old Town is very heavily regarding some of these chemicals. So each water body has a different
composition.
Yeah, composition. So. So I think we're all, this is a discussion item, so I don't think there's anything we need to do at this moment.
Well, resolution to push the start date back till March 1st, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
March 1st or March 15th, do you think?
Well, when's our meeting in March, so we kind of know, we align to that. Sorry, Julie.
That's okay. March 12th would be the first meeting in March.
So you recommend arbitrarily that would be the date because it's a meeting? I don't-
No, they start, when do you start? You start in March, right?
They start March 1.
Usually you don't start until April because I'm out of here in March.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
March is.
I think
Well,
March
Barbados
because
in March.
you're starting to put down lime and
Yeah, St. Patrick's Day.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
March 1, I guess.
And you want to make sure, though, that you don't want to bog them down in paperwork. If they're starting work in March, the last thing you want to do is try and bog them down with paperwork and all of this.
So then a possible outcome could be then we meet on the 12th and be like,
Well, what you're really hoping is by February, you've made a decision so we can get these letters out to people. So that on March, they already have them. Because our goal is to mail these out. We have a pretty good list of landscapers that are licensed in Southampton, licensed with the county. We're kind of cross-checking landscapers. So we're getting word out as fast. We would get word out to these people, 40, 45 days in advance of when this took effect. So I would hope that by mid-February, second meeting in February, that this board will have fine-tuned what.
So you're saying, quite honestly, I have no problem making it town. I was never really a fan of going. I understood the burden to some of the smaller business owners, so I don't really have a problem making it town. So are you saying perhaps that should be closer then? February than March?
No, I think March is a good date. I'm saying it's not so much when our meeting is in March. I think we have to make this decision before March so that the law does take effect in March and you've already...
Gotcha.
We've got that. They've got notice that they understand what they need to do, because if we push it out too much forward, they're going to be full force into work.
I don't want to...
And then having them do paperwork, so...
So the other takeaway is going to be that, prior to our next meeting, that the board will have an understanding of the differences between the county license and the town's license, what the intermunicipal agreement would look like, and just in whether or not there's a cost associated with such.
Do we have an intermunicipal agreement now with the county then for...
It's a county law.
It's a county law.
With the exception of, right, so what happens is that when Southampton and I think East Hampton as well decided that they wanted to do their own licensing, they petitioned the county to allow them to license, and so when you go to apply, it says, this license is not valid in the towns of Southampton and East Hampton.
The incorporated villages in the town of Southampton are under the jurisdiction of Suffolk County today.
Right.
Except for one you mentioned.
No, I think that there's I think most of them have an agreement with Southampton, with the exception of Southampton and the village of Southampton, the village of Sagaponack are the only two that require the county. The rest have intermunicipal agreements with their towns, including Sag Harbor, which has one with Southampton and East Hampton. So if you're...
Because it's split.
Yes.
But the point is, Suffolk County currently does the enforcement for our village, and we do not pay them anything. So, because we are part of Suffolk County.
Right. So essentially, we would enforce our own law. So it would be through our justice court, whether or not they, follow or not. What we would use the town for is if there's a complaint, a homeowner can have a landscaper or home improvement person go in front of their licensing review board. So you would use their licensing review board. So
rather than Suffolk County.
And enforcement of this would be, Chief, would police, if they're driving by and seeing no licensing, would they, again, verbal, then whatever, or are we putting a lot more on our code enforcement?
Kimberly's going to do it.
Could be us or the building.
Yeah.
Or also under...
Could be probably a police officer too, but I don't think they're looking.
I know they're not looking, but I guess if they're... if
there's a village law, we can, other than the building code, we can enforce it. Okay. And that prohibits us. Otherwise, we would enforce that too.
Trustee.
So Rich, you were not really in favor of, you liked using the town even back then, and for whatever reason, you guys, okay.
For simplicity. And again, and that's kind of why when I spoke with Kimberly and other trustees and some of the as business owners that were referred to me, when we first brought this out back in the spring, that really was kind of the idea, was that we were going to hash this out during the course of the year. Well, obviously things changed, and it just kind of fell aside. And until, I'll be honest, I kind of forgot it myself until Trustee Allen said, wow, this is going to take effect in January. I'm like, oof. And that's really was the impetus to, but even back then, listening, because it was a very lengthy discussion from business owners and landscapers and such, and we had regulatory boards from other counties. So there was a lot of input into it. But thinking of local rule, home rule, and so forth, and simplicity, I didn't have an issue with keeping it town related.
So are you going to make the motion then, because Trustee Allen has already done one for tonight?
She can make another one. She's feeling left out, so you can make another motion to go ahead and extend this to whatever date that.
Oh, go ahead, Rich. You said it so nicely.
What's the date?
March 1st.
Okay, so we're going to make a resolution that we
Second it.
postpone the registration deadline from January 1st to March 12th.
Second. I
Okay.
second that.
Good.
Just to clarify, though, this will be discussed again at the February 13th meeting.
Correct. Thank you, Counselor.
But we hope to have everything done before that, so we can get this out.
What could it- right.
So that they'll be in compliance by March 1st.
Well, keep in mind, first thing that's going to be decided is whether or not we're going to stay with the law as it is and start March 1st. Then we need really no action other than, go forward.
Right, then
If
we
in
gotta
fact we
change
are
the
going to
town.
change it,
The town
then we are going to
versus-
have
yeah.
to, we are going to have to both have a public hearing on a change of law and a
Repeal and replace.
resolution entering into an intermunicipal agreement with the town.
Okay.
Not that difficult to do,
Gotcha.
but
And we have to
that-
know.
Most likely then we could.
that would have to be done by the February.
And obviously it's
By the
done.
February meeting, and then worst case,
We're one of only 2 villages that haven't done it.
yeah. Okay, I got
The
you.
most, one of the first things we were trying to do here and I think was fairly successful was pass a leaf blower law, which, again, it wasn't perfect, but it was successful. And now this is, this was a part of it, so that it also helped us when people were not following the leaf blower law. Well, are you registered with the village? And if you are, we can take your license away for not
Right.
following.
Okay.
Yeah, it was another layer. It basically added that extra layer of enforcement. That's kind of-
So again, the idea is now relook at it, get the process right, get everything done so that we're ready to move forward.
Chances are, if you're a prominent, large company, you already have a Suffolk County, a town license, an East Hampton license, you've got them all.
Yeah.
But if you're only operating in the village, case in point, you don't really want to go all the way up to Hopog and spend X hundreds of dollars, right?
No, it's a lot in detail with the license, if you ever looked into.
Yeah.
You could have just nodded your head. You could have just nodded along with her, but now you got to come up. You know?
3 minutes.
Name.
Another 3 minutes?
Make it one.
Sit down and come back up?
Yeah, make it one. Let's go.
Well, the Suffolk County license, it details, it's not just landscaping. There's other, if you look into it, it's about all kinds of different things, which you don't need as a landscaper.
Right.
So
It covers all the
That's
trades.
separate. I have it right here.
It's a
Plumbing
lot.
is a separate license. Suffolk County,
Suffolk County is just different.
take a look at both of them. They're very similar. The difference is the test, the affirmation.
Just to get your landscaping license.
Yeah,
It's just
I'll
one.
give you the copies.
You got look at the notes. I mean, come on.
Okay. I see the notes.
Yeah,
Got a lot.
you going to argue with this?
No. It's more, there's a lot more information, you're right.
Right, there's a lot more information that goes
Yeah.
on. I don't put down pesticides anymore, because I used to go to Cornell, to the DEC, and you had to take a course, and you had to go and put your hours in, you had to take a test. But now I don't do that, because I don't like putting down any chemicals, I don't like putting down any fertilizer, and actually, the place on Wickapog now is totally organic.
Really?
Yes.
That's good to know.
We switched over. I finally got them to go organic, and
And that's the trend.
we have a
It
guy
is.
I
from
think
East Hampton
people
that
are-
comes and puts down organic stuff, and because I just take care of the house.
Thank you.
But it's because I said, your drinking water, I was like, you go visit the pond across the street all the time, you see all the birds and the waterfowl in the water. I was like, what you put down in the ground affects everything. So they switched over, which is cool. So I wish everybody would do that around Lake Agawam, but that's another situation, because I don't know how you're going to, a lot of these landscapers make a lot of money putting down fertilizer, so it's tough. I mean, I hate fertilizer, and I disagree with Mr. Gobler about Lake Agawam, that the nitrogen is coming from the septic lines. It's a lot coming from the fertilizer, a lot. You knew how many tons that went down on the lawn.
Well, they actually include wastewater, which means runoff and all that, so it was all involved.
All right,
But the
wastewater.
point.
But he was
right,
saying
yeah.
the septic system was the big, which I disagree, because back in the day, they were seasonal homes. I mean,
It was also a badge of honor to have a brown lawn by August. I mean, I remember that growing up. You knew you had a hot, good summer if your lawn was brown by August, by end of August, by going back to school.
We'll have to implement those challenges again.
just had to cut your lawn real low.
Brown lawn
Not the greenest lawn.
Just cut your lawn real low and don't water it, it'll turn
No,
brown.
but that's just it. Back then, you really
We
didn't
used
have
locks
watering.
back then, so it cut
Right.
You didn't
low.
have watering, you didn't
No,
have the
no
fertilizer, you
irrigation.
didn't have any of that, and yeah.
And plus, the lawnmower back then of choice was the lock, which cut low. You didn't have the choice to cut it higher.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Oh, you did have a choice, though, because you could set the,
You-
you could take it to Grotsky and have him,
Yeah, right.
Lower or higher.
But not as much as a rotary. But to your point, yes, and what Trustee Allen said, it was, the idea was that county, whatever it may be, it was just a more arduous process.
right.
And it's
It is, it is.
And it's more expensive.
It
It's
is.
more expensive, so.
Town license is fine. Show your
Again, as
insurance.
Trustee Allen said, the larger
That's the big thing,
operations
you know.
already have all
They
of it.
already have every license.
So it does, it's
Up and down the
a
alley.
non-effect to them. It was, again, the smaller
Yeah.
business owner. So I think we're all in agreement here.
We want to help you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fran, just say your name.
Francis Adam Chesky,
Thank you.
40 West Prospect Street.
Thank you.
Can you spell that?
Spell it? Yeah, I don't even know.
Russell, the motion needs to be seconded.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Okay, in the spirit of keeping this.
She did
I
second it.
seconded it
She did
already.
second.
Yeah, she
Thank
did.
you.
A
Kimberly
long
did.
time ago.
Yeah.
Trustee Allen did.
I made it and she seconded. Oh,
Rich
don't
made
leave
the
her out. She's going to hate that.
Kimberly Allen.
Don't
Trustee
worry,
Allen.
I'll worm my way in.
That's
You know
right. She'll
that.
correct it in the email later.
Okay, let's stay on track, everyone here. Just to, in the spirit of keeping things brief, I just wanted to make a motion to add, actually two, but we'll start with one additional item to the agenda. That just involves a discussion, a brief discussion about swapping one meeting to a work session. Just I quickly want to discuss this. Hoping I can get a second to discuss this.
I haven't even thought about it, but
But
it's up to
second, I
anybody
mean,
else.
yeah, no, second, we can bring it up as a discussion.
All in favor?
Aye.
So so you want to change the second word, it was always called a work session. Back in the day, it was called a work session. Other meetings have a work session where it's open to the public, but there's no participation from the public. I don't recall, since I've been around, that was ever the case with this, but it is done in places, so, we've always had a public, which was the first meeting of the month, and then the second was called a work session. Somewhere along the line, one of the trustees said, there is no difference when we just call it public session number 2 or something like that. But, so you're proposing that you would like the second meeting to go back to an actual bona fide work session where it's...
Just to, I want to discuss it now, but ultimately that's what I'd like to see happen. And this stemmed from a conversation that I had actually with the mayor of Sag Harbor, and she was saying, we had a quick coffee, she was saying it's actually very productive when they have their work sessions because we don't have really an opportunity to kind of sit down at a table together and to discuss issues. So we can do one and one, we can keep it as usual, and then we could have a third. But ultimately, I think one and one would be the best. And the work session would allow us to, again, just work through our priorities. It'd be a great opportunity for commissioners of departments to sit down and let us know what's going on in those respective departments, and just actually work on our public hearings regarding local laws, instead of having, to do what we did tonight and kind of be up here. So that's what I'd like to propose. Again, we don't have to do anything today, but maybe the start of next year. Just want to see if anyone has any comments on that, positive, negative. I'm open to anything.
Russell Town does it that way too, right?
Town's a little different because they have 2 work sessions, 2 meetings. They have a work session in advance of a meeting. But most villages will have a work session separate from, some of them do a work session, sit around a table, go immediately into a meeting. Others will just have a separate work session. My only recommendation would be that at that work session, we do allow it to go to a public meeting simply for the purpose of passing certain important resolutions, such as the warrant, because you don't want to have to go an entire month without paying your vendors. But that would be my only recommendation on that.
Yeah, that's my only thing, is as long as the work of the village can get done with one public and one work session, I don't see any issue, any real issue without making the change.
Other than the warrant, are presentations allowed in the work session?
Yeah, so what you will have happen is you actually will never run into a situation where we had that one meeting where someone stood up or shouted out, I guess, that, wait a second, this is becoming a public hearing, it wasn't noticed. So so presentations, as they're supposed to be, as they were tonight, are to the board. And, essentially they, sit around and they discuss it, you go back and forth, it's a dialogue, it's a presentation that's made to the board. Then, when you go to the next meeting, the public will have watched it on television or sat in the audience, and then they can comment about that presentation. And it will also keep the workflow of the village board moving, because we kind of have melded the two together, and all of a sudden the public's coming up and talking. And it really should be your discussions you should have here, and then get input from your public. That's kind of the meaning of a work session. So.
And the public can be at the working session, but they can't speak, or they can watch it on tape.
Absolutely, it's an open meeting.
Yeah, you can sit there.
I just wanted to
But there'd
lay it out so everybody knows.
Yeah, there'd be no public comment at all to come to the podium. So that, you're right, that would be an adjustment for some. But that would actually be maybe a nice adjustment for some.
Right, so tonight,
no, I'm actually.
Right. So tonight you would essentially have done your 2 board presentations. What is going to turn out to be, I guess, 5 discussion items would have been your work session, and then we would have then I would have recommended we go into an open meeting for the purpose of passing necessary resolutions, and that would be your work session.
So streamline it a bit is really the process, which is what you're looking to do, and no problem.
And if the focus is more on executing our, the day-to-day and liaising with the committees and commissions versus, other items. So, again, we can deal with this at the next meeting. We can do it now. I'm really open. So.
The only thing I'd ask is I think instead of just putting something out and then realizing it's not working, I think we should probably put pen to paper a little, so that everyone kind of understands how it's going to work, and then it's a simple resolution of the board to move that forward.
And we can even do a trial potentially too, so we can start in January 2020. We can try 3 months with this schedule, and if it's working, we'll continue, and if it's not working, we'll go back to the old format. So maybe then, Russell, if you don't mind, you can also go through the calendar. We can determine which will be open public meeting and which will be the public work session.
Oddly, my initial thought when this was discussed, I honestly think that there's an advantage to flipping it and having the first meeting of the month be your work session, and then your meeting is very close. Your meeting is only 12 days away. So everything you're discussing on the first meeting of the month is fresh, is relevant, and then you have a board meeting regarding it. And, as opposed to having the work session, the second one, and sometimes you have nearly 3.5, almost 4 weeks till you get to a meeting. So many other topics may come up in that time that you want in the meeting that you haven't had a discussion about. So I always think the work session should be first, closest to the meeting. And then, so that would be one of my first recommendations.
Good idea. All right. That's all on this topic. And then the other item I'd love to add to the agenda is signage process regarding the ARB. So if I can make a motion to just quickly discuss that, would love to do so. So hopefully, I don't know if there's a second.
All in favor?
So this discussion item is simply about the Architecture Review Board. We have a lot of merchants, especially as we get closer to the summer, around Easter time, and then as we heat up, get to Memorial Day. As we heard from one merchant tonight, sometimes it's very tough. There's meetings are spaced out when you're in business, especially in a competitive retail landscape. You've got to be able to get your sign approved quickly. So I'd either like to do one or both of the following, which is to spin off a different meeting to get your sign approved, or alternatively, either be able to get that approved simply by adhering to standards that the building department sets, and if you hit those standards, like a simple decal that says Happy Holidays, that should be approved. Or we have, something we obviously have to look into this from a legal point of view, but I just want to get comments on that. I would love for our merchants not to have to sit through and wait. If they want to get a sign for the holidays or whatnot, or they sign a lease on May 17th, I don't want them to have to wait till June to get a sign. So
you're right.
I want them in and out.
The interesting choice of words that this woman said tonight was obstacles.
Yeah.
And that can be that case, so.
But in all fairness, this was an exception because I was actually there when this was discussed, and the building department is there to help. I have to go back and do a little bit of, forensic, what happened at the crime scene. But we should also go back and say, hey, if we as a board know there's a holiday and we're not going to have a board meeting, we should put a resolution in place to shift that date so no applicant waits a month. It wasn't just her, it was every single person had to wait until the next meeting. That to me is an even bigger issue.
No, she used to,
with regards to signs, we should definitely do something around that. I just know that the reason why we have people look at it is there's a sign size, there's a building size, there's a frontage size, there's an aesthetic issue around sizes, there's a color issue, there's a glare and light issue, because that's what the application asks you for. Let's make it easier, but I don't want to just say, let's extricate signs just until we look at it. I think it's a great idea. And Chris has already said, let's do this. But let's just figure out the process.
The guidelines.
In our next working session, and then make it happen.
Okay. I would also, if you'd be so inclined, call up East Hampton and ask them how they do it, because it's way easier in East Hampton than it is in South to get your sign approved.
No doubt. But to me, there's a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is we're going to have more pop-up stores, because that's just like artificial intelligence and Bitcoin and the internet. That's actually the way we're going. And we should be thinking about how do we allow that type of business to come into the village. I mean, I'm just talking extemporaneously here, but that to me is more than just signs. And yes, we all will definitely do our research with regards to how it's done elsewhere. I just don't know it. I know what's working today can be better, and you're absolutely right, and Chris has recommended it.
I mean, in the ideal world, the way I would envision it is you can even submit your application online with the rendering of your storefront, and then maybe within 72 hours get a decision, or maybe not even have to do that, and just if you adhere to certain protocols, that's what you have to do. But ultimately, we are experiencing a situation where we aren't attracting enough business to the village, so removing, as our speaker said, obstacles is the ideal situation. So that's all I have.
No, but that's right too. No, there's certain stuff that they fit within and get a response right off the bat, like being pre-approved, if you will, within 72 hours, or not to get notified. No, this is outside of the scope. You got to come to a meeting.
Right.
They'll know.
Yeah.
It's a 20/80 rule. If it's, fits into the 80% of the normal stuff, let's just make it happen as quick and easy as we can.
Yeah.
But I guess my question to you is, you're asking us if we think this is a good idea? I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah,
And we all think it's a good idea,
yeah.
but I just
But no
don't know
one-
what our process would be, that's all.
They don't want Sip and Soda just changing their sign automatically. That sign is a classic.
But I mean, I think no one should feel no one should feel criminalized, for lack of a better word, going in front of our boards for something as simple as a sign, and all of that. So I mean, if we can, as Trustee Allen said, the 80/20 rule, if it fits within the 80, they get approval, and if it's outside of the scope, then we do it. It's kind of like what we've done with sunken tennis courts and what was the other, and some
Flat roofs.
and flat roofs.
We did sunken
Flag
tennis.
lots, flag lots.
Flag lots or whatever. I mean, yeah, exactly. So it's, again, you fit the norm, you get approval.
Yeah.
Or you're approved unless you're outside the norm.
All right.
Say something?
Yeah, please.
Let's make it simpler.
Okay.
Right? Perfect.
What's that?
Let's make it simpler.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna fry.
No, I thought you were saying let's make it simpler, and there's no approval whatsoever.
No, let's make it simpler and get
Oh, my God.
Period.
Okay, I think with that said, we can move to communications to the board. It's, we have Denise Smith, Santa at Windward Way Park, December 14th, 2019.
So I'll read it, Mayor Warren and the Board of Trustees. We would like to request permission from the board to bring Santa Claus back to Windward Way Park. Our current date of choice is Saturday, December 14th at 3 o'clock. We've already obtained the assistance of Southampton Village PBA in procuring toys for the children and will be serving hot chocolate and cookies. Thank you in advance for your consideration. All they're really looking for is the ability to use the park. And I think in the past, that is an event that did take place. And
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, and then it stopped. Right.
Yeah, whatever. According to this, it kind of implies in the letter that it stops somewhere. Happy Thanksgiving, Frank. Yeah.
Thanks, Fran.
So yes, that was done in the past.
Okay. Yeah, so, is there any other questions?
So then we give approval, yeah.
Yep, entertain a motion to permit, is this a group or is it just,
My understanding is that she submitted the letter directly, but I don't know that it was a group, per
Okay.
se.
I thought it said there were a few people in the letter.
yeah, it's Denise
Sincerely.
Smith, Carl Davis,
So,
Kim
yeah,
Jones.
there were a few names at the bottom of the letter,
Yes.
so maybe like there's some form of committee, if you will.
Yeah. To permit this event to take place at Windward Way Park on Saturday, December 14th, 2019 at 3 p.m.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Are we establishing any budget here for this, or is this completely?
I don't think we need,
enterprise?
yeah, you mean as far as what our costs are going to be?
Yeah.
They're not looking for any assistance whatsoever because of the fact they're just looking for the ability to use our park, and that's a park that we just don't have an automatic permit for, so similar to when people ask to use Downs Park for a
It's a
softball
village-owned park,
tournament.
technically,
Right.
so it's a technicality. They just have to come and ask to use it for a purpose that they're not even asking us.
Hospital uses the Cooper's Beach for their annual picnic, and Mahoney uses Downs Park for their annual barbecue, those
Just
types
ask
of
permission to
things.
use a public asset, that's all.
But Santa's coming on a fire truck, I hear.
That I don't know, but they would procure that on
Which is
their own.
great.
I mean, PBA, that's what happened. Again, I don't know what's
They
going to happen.
they enlisted volunteers, which
But
is
it's all volunteers. The
great.
PBA, is donated, so
Yeah, that's
yes, it will be done through donations.
If Chief asked them to do it, they would say, we're going to get overtime, but since,
Unsolicited attack.
no, so there's no cost associated to the
On the
village.
village now.
I just would like to take a quick 2-minute break. I know we probably want to get through this, but I'd like to take a quick 2-minute recess. Do we need a motion for that, or we can just do that?
Nope, you call
Okay.
recess.
All right.
Good, let's
I'll
do
be right
that.
back, and we'll go through Trustee Claro's favorite part again.